Hey everyone, welcome to the Drive podcast. I'm your host, Peter Attia. All right, Lance, thank you for making time today to swing by.
Absolutely.
How does it feel to be back in Austin?
It is, it's pretty surreal. I mean, having been here or having lived here for 30 years, I've seen the city change, and I saw it change as a cyclist. So I think cyclists see more stuff than most people, and you're always, you're covering ground, you're finding back roads, you get a sense for a town growing. You see, obviously the roads get more crowded, but you see more construction trucks, and you figure, you're like, wait, this place is getting built out. And then if you go down the rabbit hole of hearing these offers in the real estate market, this is a different city.
Well, before we get into...
Still a great city, though.
Yeah, no, look, the only thing my wife and I could say after moving here is what took us so long. So, Before we get into kind of the details of all the stuff I want to talk about, I think it's just sometimes easier if we can get into some hard yes and no questions, just so that there's no ambiguity about some of the really important stuff.
Okay.
So
I've been here before.
Yeah, I think this is going to be familiar to you, but I want you to really limit yourself to a yes or no only, Lance. These are important questions. Is Dura-Ace better than Campy Super Record?
Yes.
Is the greatest innovation in time trialing the aerodynamic water bottle?
No.
Is Edgar Allan Poe the greatest poet of the 19th century?
Sure.
Are today's clinchers as high performing as tubulars?
Yes.
Is Alberto Contador the greatest cyclist of all time?
Absolutely not.
Can you still ride up Alpe d'Huez in under 45 minutes?
Probably not.
Is the 1985 Oakley Pilot Big Ass Sunglass the greatest shades of all time?
No, but...
Just yes or no?
No.
Thank you. Is Pinarello the best bike on the market?
No.
Is George Hincapie the best lieutenant you've ever had?
Absolutely.
Was your grandfather the first man to ride his bike on the moon in 1969?
No.
All right. Now that we've got that out of the way, talk to me about Plano, northeast suburb of Dallas.
Pretty much straight north. Plano is, it lives up to its name, right? Plano is Spanish for flat, plano. Very flat, very windy, growing, that's another community like Austin that's drastically changed. When I was a kid growing up in Plano, I would, leave the house and be out in the fields, and I would head up into Allen, and I'd go around Lake Lavon, or I would out to Frisco. I mean, now Frisco is one of the fastest growing communities in America. There was only one building out there, and that was the global headquarters for EDS. People thought Ross Perot was nuts to build, the EDS headquarters there. And now it's, mom's still there. So just going back is crazy. A lot of times when I visit my mom, I always take my bike everywhere, but I'll just kind of ride around and, I'll go past Dooley Elementary where I went to middle school, and I actually went to, elementary school, and middle school was Armstrong. I'll just go by these places and look at them through a 50-year-old's eyes. It's crazy. So it's,
Is it bittersweet, by the way? Because I hate seeing where I grew up. I hate it with a passion. The last time I went back to look at my elementary school, it just upset me so much. I don't know. I could explore that.
No. I think most people have some level of that in their lives. You're allowed to sort of hate where you grew up. I think. I don't want to live there, but it's fine to go back, see mom.
So your birth father is Eddie Gunderson, right? Mm-hmm. He left you guys when you were 2. Did you ever see him again after that?
Never saw him again.
Did you ever want to?
Well, he's now passed away.
Yeah, he passed away in 2012.
No, that's a good, maybe around there. And from what I hear, he died of a spider bite. Maybe that led to some other complications, but I never had a desire to sort of reconnect with him for most of my life. And even, of course now it would be too late, but I might have a different view of that now.
Did he ever reach out to you?
He, not directly. When after the first tour, when in 99, people reached out to him. So a lot of the press and journalists, they wanted this story. And his interviews were just, they were totally inappropriate. The comments about my mom that far down the road. But they were,
meaning he had disparaging things to say about your mom, or
yeah. And so but I don't think Eddie was a Rhodes Scholar.
So how long after, or how old were you when she met and or married Terry Armstrong?
So I would have been 3 or 4. Yeah. Right. And so that's where the name comes from, right? I wasn't born Lance Armstrong. Funny thing is my initials would have been Leg if I would have stayed Lance Edward Gunderson. But yeah, she became obviously Linda Armstrong and I became Lance Armstrong.
You've told me stories in the past, and I know you've spoken a bit publicly about Terry and kind of how strict he was. And did you ever think of him as a father? Did he feel that way to you in any way, shape, or form?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I didn't, as a 5, 6, 7-year-old kid, you don't know, you have your mother, and I knew he wasn't my biological father, but we had a roof over our heads, and my mom seemed happy, and so yeah, at a young age, and he wasn't. When you say violent, he was just strict. It was every little thing got you in trouble, and shit. If I look at my kids' lives, and if they leave their drawer open, I walk by and I'm like, first of all, I don't care if they leave their drawer open. That would have been a big deal to him.
So I know you've told the story before about, hey, playing every Texas sport every kid does. You didn't shine in any of those things. And you're 12 years old, mom throws you into swimming, which you didn't really know how to do, but you obviously picked it up super fast, huh? Yeah.
I caught it early. You're right. I didn't know how to swim. And she didn't necessarily suggest swimming. She knew that she had a high energy kid that if that wasn't applied somewhere or directed somewhere, it was going to go somewhere toxic. And so she was right about that. But, and I sucked. At sort of mainstream sports, I've had an issue with balls my whole life.
Although you didn't have an issue with your phone a second ago. That phone came falling out, and that was one of the most impressive one-handed catches I've seen in a long time.
Yeah. But I had a few friends on the swim team. So I thought, well, I'll try that. And problem is I was 12, they were all 12.
And was this an age group team?
This was an age group team. So very different. Enough about swimming to be dangerous. And so it's swimming is really kind of, there's different categories, so to speak, right? The most serious is age group swimming. That's where Michael Phelps grew up swimming. That's where everybody grew up swimming. Then you have sort of country club setups where it's a summer league and you swim some laps and you have some meets and all the parents are there. And then you have kind of high school, right? Which most of the time, at least for us, age group was the serious training for high school swimming. But yeah, I was 12 and I didn't know how to swim. I certainly didn't know how to swim. I could have faked freestyle, but I didn't know any strokes. So, I showed up and man, the coach, they kind of watch you for a while. And they stuck me in the 6-year-old lane, 7-year-old lane. And I still don't, when I think back, and I never even questioned it, I just stayed. I stayed swimming with these little kids. Meanwhile, all my buddies are over at the other end of the pool, doing 3100s on whatever. And I'm like, But I just hung in there, and I swam the kids, and then after a month of that, then I moved over a lane and I was with the 8-year-olds. And then a month later, I just kind of kept going across the pool until, probably, less than a year later, I was a legit swimmer. Still one of my great loves.
So by the time you get into high school, you're swimming both for the high school team and the age group league?
Yes and no, because I turned pro in triathlon when I was 15. So I was already, my swim coach at the time, who was just a total hard ass, but an amazing coach named Chris McCurdy. Wonderful coach, one of the best coaches I've ever had, but man, he was tough. And it was, you did not miss a workout. You didn't skip a workout. There were no excuses. Holidays, family, it doesn't matter. And our age group team was called COPS, City of Plano Swimmers, which was at the time one of the best age group teams in the country. And that was because of McCurdy. And I started traveling to triathlons and skipping workouts because I was on a ride or a run, and he wasn't having it at all.
So you gravitated to the mile in swimming, right?
Well, yeah. That was, I'm an endurance guy. Yeah. So, I have no, other than catching that phone, I don't have great fast twitch muscle. My 100 free, I could have, whereas the miles, 16 and a half of those.
Yep.
What
was your best mile?
I'd have to go back and look. It was decent. At state championships one year, I got third. It was decent, but not. I wasn't going to the Olympics.
Do you think if you'd stayed with swimming and that was the only thing you could have pursued, you would have at least, you would have swum in college, presumably?
I would have swam in college. And if you ask McCurdy, he thinks I could have gone far, but I just, I was 15. There was prize money. There was travel. I was like, hey, this is way cooler.
When did you realize you also had a knack to run and bike?
I actually was running right around the same time. So at the same time I was swimming, I was running track and cross country in high school. So I was a decent, in Plano, I was city champ and and it wouldn't have been I was young enough that we ran the 1200 city champ in that. And I remember, back then the timing was primitive. You had these timers per athlete, stopwatches, and you would come across the line. It's a funny story. And they'd ask you your name. And so I came across the line and the timer says, what's your name? And I was going to Armstrong Middle School. And I said, Armstrong. And he said, I didn't ask you what school you went to. I said, what's your name? And I said, finally I was like, after 3 or 4 go-rounds, I was like, I'm Armstrong from Armstrong. But I was a decent runner.
How much did you enjoy training at that age?
I loved it. The most structured thing I had was swimming. McCurdy was, you should have seen the board. This dude, I don't know. He must have laid awake every night and dreamed up these workouts. It was so detailed. And I loved that. And that was the most structure I had. Running, I would train a little with the cross country team that had structure. We had another great coach in track and cross country named James Mays. So James Mays was a world-class 800-meter runner. He was actually the rabbit for the Dream Mile. And this guy ended up being our high school track and cross country coach. And he was awesome. He'd run with us and he drove a Porsche. And we're like, holy shit, our teacher, who's this dude? He was awesome. And then cycling was more, I just go pedal around, no structure. Group rides.
When did it become clear to you that you had a knack for this at the level of, was it that one race that everybody talks about where you were right at the front with Mark Allen and you're 15 years old? And at the time, Mark Allen must have been one of the top 3 professional triathletes in the world.
By far. Well, that was my first pro race. That was the President's Triathlon in Dallas.
That was 86.
That would have been 87, because I did the President's in 86, which was out at Lake Levon. It was a longer format or longer distance. And then they moved it over to Las Colinas, where the old Cowboys facility was in 87, and they made it an Olympic distance. And I was training with some guys, and they said, well, you should just turn pro and go try it. I was 15 years old. And so, but I was swimming my ass off. I mean, I was a great swimmer. So I came out, I knew I was going to come out of the water with the leaders.
So this is Olympic distance. So you're coming out of the water under 20 minutes.
Oh, easy. Yeah.
And then you hop on the bike. You're going under an hour. You're going, what, 55
Yep. This is pre-aero bars. Although actually that might have been the year Andrew McNaughton flew away on the bike. He had the bars, the original Scott aero bars. And then I rode with Alan the whole time on the bike. And I'm sure he was, they all race each other every weekend. They know.
Was Dave Scott there too?
I don't know if Dave was there.
Mike Pigg would have been there.
Pigg might have been there. The big Kiwi. Anyways, it was. So I rode with Alan, but I'm sure he's looking at me going, "Who the fuck is this person? This guy? This kid?" And then a guy like Mark Allen get off and run 32.
And you would run what, a 36 after that?
No, probably more, right? 38 or 39. And so I think I ended up 5th or 6th, and I was like, okay, I can do this.
Was the bike different compared to swimming and running for you? Like, was there a gear that you felt you had there that you didn't have in the other two?
I don't know about a gear, but the experience was certainly different. I mean,
how so? I mean, I know it is, but what did you feel that was different?
Well, it's just like I said at the top, being outside. I mean, think about the life of a full-time, essentially professional swimmer. You spend, and
you're looking.
I don't think people
line.
really appreciate how much time swimmers devote to their sport and how much distance they cover. I mean, when we were 13, 14, 15, we were swimming. There'd be days we'd swim 10 miles a day. Like if somebody said they run 10 miles a day, I would say, you're a fucking badass. Swimming, that's 2 days. So 5:30 a.m. morning practice for an hour and 2 hours in the afternoon. I mean, you're covering some ground and you're staring at a black line the whole time. That's why swimmers are crazy.
Well, and the funny thing is most people don't appreciate that the swim to run ratio is about 4-1. So when you say somebody swims 10 miles a day, that's comparable metabolically to running 40 miles a day.
I mean, there's no impact.
Without the impact.
Which is what makes it a great sport. For, as you get to be my age or even older. I mean, the thing I love about swimming is you can swim your whole life, right? You can't necessarily ride your whole life. You certainly can't run your whole life. Like swimming, if you put a gun to my head and said, okay, dude, you got one sport to choose for the rest of your life, there is no question it would be swimming. No question.
So I've heard you say in a previous interview that triathlons were awesome, but at some point you got this desire to go to the Olympics, and you realized that
what kid doesn't want to go to the Olympics?
Yeah, well, at some point you realized, look, my quickest path there is probably going to be on the bike.
Yep.
And I'm guessing that was the late '80s. You kind of had that realization.
I started to transition to full-time cycling in '89. Still doing tries, so I did them also in '89 and '90. Went to the Junior World Championships in Moscow in 1989. But in my mind, I just assumed triathlon would be an Olympic sport. It is the ultimate. I mean, the best sports in the Olympics are swimming and cycling and running. Like, why wouldn't we combine them and make this an Olympic sport? Well, this is in the late 80s, early 90s.
Right, it wouldn't be till 2000, right?
2000 in Sydney was the first time. Nobody knew that, but so I switched over basically full time in 1990 or 91.
Which is kind of amazing to now fast forward to 93. What expectations did you have going into Oslo, into that road race for the World Championship?
Well, the one thing that did happen is I
you went to the Olympics, actually. You did go to Barcelona.
I fulfilled that dream going to the Barcelona games.
You did road race or time trial? What did you do?
No, they didn't have the time trial back then. They had, and I want to say, I think we had team time trial. I did the road race. I don't think I did the TTT.
How many cyclists went for the U.S.?
Boy, you're making me think a lot. I mean, this is a long time ago, Peter. This is 30 years ago. So I don't know, 3 or 4.
But this was back in the day when you didn't have pros there, right?
No pros. Yeah. They added the pros in 96. You had and that was
So who were the best amateurs then? Bobby Julich, you?
Yeah. And then, the international guy, the Italians were amazing. Casartelli, who we lost in 95.
He won
the Olympic race. Games. Davide Rebellin was on the Italian team. But, a lot of, Eric Decker was on the Dutch team. Zabel was on the German team.
So what was that like there competing against the best amateur cyclists in the world?
It was great. I didn't race very well. I didn't, Tactically, I was still trying to figure out cycling. I didn't know how to move through the peloton and sort of gauge and judge the peloton and the tactics and the flow of the race. That's
very hard for people who watch cycling to understand.
It's funny, isn't it?
You take it for granted now.
Yeah, now you could throw me in any bike race and I could absolutely find my way around.
But that's not, nobody's born with that skill, right? That strikes me as I'm sure there are some people who'd have a better feel for it than others.
When they start young. You get a guy like George, he was racing in Central Park against adult men when he was, 12 years old.
But to go from, because in triathlon, you can't even, could you draft at the time in 90, 91? Nope. All right. So you go from a sport where
you should never be able to draft in triathlon. I've got, this pisses off all the,
all the purists.
Well, no, all the, the sort of the ITU guys, the Olympic guys, cause I got in a bunch of grief once cause I called, that part of triathlon, a shampoo, a blow dry, and a 10K. And it was people were, but anyways, it's an individual sport.
But that's amazing that your cycling career as a cyclist begins 2 years before the Olympics, because all of the stuff you're doing as a triathlete is preparing your cardiovascular system and your fitness, but not your bike handling skills, not your tactics, not any of those other things.
No, the handling I had down. I rode enough that I was comfortable in the peloton, but just understanding the movements of the race and positioning and just the peloton. It's just a big organism, and you got to be at the right place at the right time. And it took me a few years.
What metrics were you guys looking at then? Were you mostly just relying on heart rate?
Not even. Going back then, heart rate monitors, and when I got on Motorola, we were sponsored by Polar. And so we had some of the earliest heart rate monitors. These things were I'm sure you could still find them. They were massive. These things they look like bricks.
Legitimately component of weight.
And that was it. And that was sort of the first, obviously no power meters, no testing. You just looked at the heart rate.
So did you have any metrics or insights into your physiology being unique at the time? Did you figure out what your maximum heart rate was? We'll get to it later, but I remember you telling me during, I don't remember which time trial it was, you were telling me about in one of your tours that you were able to hold a heart rate of 200 beats per minute for the entire TT.
Yeah, that was later. I think the first time I really thought I had an engine, so to speak, and maybe because they told me that, is they were doing a study at the Cooper Clinic in Dallas. And of course, I was living in Plano, and it was a treadmill test, and they wanted me to, and I forget what the original study was, but it's got a funny ending to the story. It was all about core temp. And so I went down and did a running VO2 test, and the guy was like, oh, I killed this thing. And then they, do
you remember what your VO2 max was then?
No, but the guy was like, okay, this kid's special. And then they said, well, look, we'd like you to come back next week because we're doing this whole core temp study. But this time you're going to have to do it with some sort of
probe in the...
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm 15. And this guy says he's going to shove something up my ass. And I am terrified. I'm like, I never went back. So to that research.
So to this day, we have no idea what your core temperature response would have been under that aerobic load. Well, you want to do that test? We can do it again.
I know enough to know that I run hot, so that I'm going to leave it at that.
So Motorola was 93.
I went to Motorola in actually in 92. I was the only amateur on the team.
Steve Bauer was on that team.
Bauer was there, Phil Anderson, Andy Hampston.
So by the way, Steve Bauer is why a kid growing up in Canada like me was obsessed with cycling growing up, right?
Yep.
So I was one of like 12 people in North America that loved cycling, followed it, because Bauer won a silver in 84 at the Olympics. So basically I'm 10, 11 years old. That puts cycling on the map as something that's like awesome. Yep. And then, of course, Le Mans was, I mean, forget about it, like the most exciting thing in all of sports.
I mean, 1989 was...
The 89 comeback is hooked. Unbelievable. Some would argue the greatest ending to a tour. You could argue maybe second greatest after what happened last year. Let the scholars debate that. But I want to talk about the 93 season because you've got a guy named Miguel Indurain who's come along and dethroned...
Greg.
Who's dethroned Greg, right? Mm-hmm. And at this point, Indurain has now won 3 consecutive tours. There's no sign he's going to slow down, right? He wins 91, 92, 93. He looks like an absolute machine. This is one of the guys you're now racing against for the world championship in the road race.
Yep.
What's your thought going into that race?
Well, the way the season was structured then, and I actually much preferred it. The Worlds was much earlier. It was 4 or 5 weeks after the tour. So guys
before the Vuelta.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Well, no. Back then the Vuelta was in early in the season.
Wait. The Vuelta was before the Giro?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you had, and the Vuelta was minimized, which it should have been because anyways. But we had a true World Cup. So you had all of the monuments, all the big spring classics. And then every week after the tour, we went San Sebastian, we went Zurich, we went Leeds in England. It was like boom, boom, boom. And so it was just this, I loved the rhythm of that calendar. And I was, after the tour in 93.
Which you won a stage.
I won a stage into Verdun in the national champions jersey. And then they pulled me out because I was young. But my form just kept coming up and up and up. And in all the World Cups, I was right there. All the prep races, I knew I was going to be in the front group. I didn't care. I mean, I look around in that group. I mean, you had Olaf Ludwig, you had Indurain, you had Chiappucci, you had Schmiel, you had Museu, you had Rees. I mean, I was looking around going, yeah, of course I'm here. And then, of course, it was absolutely pissing.
The worst day I've ever seen.
Yeah, and people crashing. I mean, I crashed twice. People crashing everywhere.
How cold was it?
It's funny. I never really felt that cold. But it was cold.
It looked cold.
Yeah. It was probably in the 50s. I mean, Northern Europe.
Yeah.
With weather like that, it's going to be cold, no matter what time of year.
Explain to people what it means to win that race, to be the world champion. You get to wear a special jersey that nobody else gets to wear for a year.
Yep, you wear the rainbow jersey for a year. And then for the rest of your career, you have some representation on your jerseys or shorts. So rainbows on the sleeves, the collar. It's a cool one to win.
Thinking back to that year in the tour, we're going to talk a lot about, obviously, performance-enhancing drugs. You've in the past said, that was in the era where you and your team were still in the low octane phase of things, right? The cortisones, things like that. But it was the pre-EPO era, even though EPO was around.
It was around, yeah. This was before the real shootout.
What were you aware of in that year's tour?
I mean, there was buzz of EPO, but it was not. It wasn't a dinner table conversation like it became. I mean, there was obviously speculation, but there was scientific articles about it. People knew that substance, as great as it is to treat certain disorders or issues, it could also be hugely beneficial for endurance sport. But in 92, 93, it wasn't an obsession.
At the time, obviously, when I was just a kid following cycling, I was always surprised in the 91 tour how quickly Greg fell off. And years later, of course, we would all speculate, was that not just the passing of the torch between two great cyclists, Lamond and Indurain, but was it also the passing of the torch of an era, right? Was it, do you believe that was when high octane products became the mainstay in 91? Or do you think that no, it would not be probably until either the end of Indurain, or because clearly by the time Reese came along in 96, I mean, that might've been the most overt
well,
use.
people most that really have a deep understanding will tell you that it was in the peloton in the late 80s. But that's really going far back, and nobody from back then is talking for sure. But honestly,
Pedro Delgado, I think there were definitely rumors that because he won in didn't he win the year that Lamond was out, which was 87?
You know way too much about
maybe.
this sport.
Yeah.
You know a lot more than me. But
I peg it to the jerseys I had as a kid, because I had the PDK.
And honestly,
jersey.
Greg still could have. He towards the end of his career, and it was well documented. I'm not saying this as a knock on him, but he was starting to let himself go in the off season. I mean, he would show up to the early season races, and I mean, you could see it. You're like, dude, has this guy been training or not? And Indurain was a machine. Indurain was a beast. I mean, this guy trained 365 days a year. So
it's not clear what that transition was.
Nah. But Indurain he could do it all.
So I think another thing that most people don't understand about cycling is, or certainly about the Tour, is that because of how grueling it is, which again, I can't tell you I understand because obviously I've never done it, but as much as somebody who's never understood it or has never done it, I feel like I at least have some appreciation for it because I understand physiology. There's nothing about it that's reasonable, right? Like there's nothing about doing that is physiologically appropriate or in any way, shape, or form promotes a person's health, right? A rider at the end of the Tour is probably the least healthy they could ever be. And as a result of that, there's no era in the history of this bike race where cyclists haven't turned to substances. And whether they're banned or not banned is really a semantic point, right? But, in the earliest renditions of this race, riders were using alcohol to numb pain or traditional painkillers, cocaine, more sophisticated amphetamines.
Or hopping on trains.
Yeah, exactly. Grabbing cars.
Yeah.
Literally just getting yanked up mountains. What was the environment like? Not that you were there, but you overlapped with guys that were there in the 80s.
Yep.
Was there an environment of testing of anything? Like, were people looking at hematocrit to see if people actually blood doped, let alone using EPO? Were they testing for cortisone or testosterone or other hormones?
I have to go back and, for example, in 93, when I won a stage in the Tour, I won the Worlds, I was tested.
You were tested. Okay.
Yeah. But that's not,
Now you acknowledge that back then you were using things like cortisone. Were you worried that those things would show up, or were you just making sure that they were out of your system by the time you were racing?
Well, the way to go about that in the day was just a TUE, so a therapeutic use exemption, and a lot of these compounds come in different forms and different form factors and different administrations, and so you could say, well, I've got tendonitis in the knee, and so that's how the TUE was sort of which I think they've cut back on a lot of that. But in competition testing certainly for something like EPO, which has a 5-hour half-life,
no way,
not going to work.
Yeah. That's
where they they started doing the out of competition testing and the whereabouts but the biggest hammers that have dropped in cycling in and around drugs like that were not through testing. They were through the police. Like, look at Festina. Nobody tested positive in the Festina affair.
Right. The police showed up and raided them.
A dumbass soigneur crossing a border, gets pulled over. Lo and behold, a car full of stuff. That's how that happened. Like, the agencies had nothing to do with that.
So coming into the 94 season, you've got to be optimistic, right? You've just won. You're the world champion. Do you remember what your expectations and your goals were for that season with respect to either single day classics or grand tours?
Yeah. I thought that was an interesting period in time, though, because that is when
and I know you basically got your ass kicked that year, but I want to know what you thought coming in.
Like, I thought I would. I mean, I thought I'd be competitive in every one-day race I started.
And did you think, like, I'm going to be on the podium in the Tour in the next 3 years?
No. At that time, I was fully resigned or committed to the fact that I was a classic rider. I was a one-day rider.
What did you weigh at that point?
I probably weighed. I was big. You know,
yeah.
I was my whole career. I was big just because I as a swimmer. A swimmer never loses a swimmer's body. The back, the chest, the shoulders. I mean, you can lean it out, but you're going to be big. So I was probably 175.
Yeah, which is tough to be a climber at 175.
Yeah, but I was when in the Tours, I was, between 160, 165. Still big. Yeah, I mean, racing Pantani, who's 125.
So when do you realize in 94, like, something's wrong?
Well, I think we realized that something had changed. And I mean, it was overnight. I mean, that between 93 and 94, even though I'm sure 93 there was, and that's the great thing about a one-day race is it is in a way a race of chance. You can play your cards, you can play tactics, you obviously have to be fit enough to be in the front group. But when I made my move in 93, I mean, that was a bit of a Hail Mary. I went early, I got a gap, they were disorganized behind, and you stay away. So, the big tours were, the race of truth in the time trial or the hardest climbs, like there was those are individual competitions. And so, but there was a tectonic shift from 93 to 94.
And how long did it take you to understand this is exactly what's happening? This is not about more cortisone. This is not about more testosterone.
Well, it was all over. Yeah, it was all over the press. I mean, you had in 1994, you had in Flèche-Wallonne, you had 3 Gewist riders go up the road, and then the press went crazy after that because here you have an Italian team, Ferrari's the trainer. The press also back then was more. They were more sort of beat riders, so they were friends with the riders. They were beat writers, and they were friends with the riders. They were friends with the directors, so they were all kind of buddies. But they wouldn't write about what they would hear until then, and then they started, and then they got on it, and so and then people got to Ferrari, and he made of course the famous quote about trying to compare EPO to orange juice and. At least that's the way that it was printed. But after that, it was everywhere in the press and in the peloton.
Did you remind me what happened in the 94 Tour for you?
94, I got sick halfway through and dropped out.
Okay. And then in the 95 Tour,
finished.
You finished, and that's a tragic tour, right?
Yeah.
So Fabio is killed.
Yep. He was on our team.
He was on your team.
This is the same guy that won the Olympics.
He won the Olympics in 92. Yep. Is that a wake-up call to you in any way? Do you realize how dangerous your sport is when you watch your teammates' heads smashed open on the side of the road?
Yep. Yeah, that was, of course, the helmets were certainly not required, and very few people wore them. I'm not sure what had helped Fabio. He really hit his face, and basically died right there. But and just surreal it was a tough mountain day, and we were in the gruppetto, and I mean, we were out there forever, and we actually got news of his death in the race. And so it was just, that's so rare, but to have it happen to us on our team, you have breakfast with the guy, but he's not at the dinner table. And the whole story is tragic, right? Young wife, new baby boy. Yeah. I mean, and he was, Fabio was interesting. He wasn't your normal Italian. He was, they were all super serious, not really jokesters. He was a jokester. And he came to our, he obviously had huge talent and potential, won the Olympic gold. But he wasn't adjusting to pro cycling. And so we picked him up in 95, and ironically, for that last, or for the 9th spot, it was down to him and George. And George was actually there at the start, because we would always take 10 guys, and then literally the day before, the team would decide who the 9th guy was. And they decided, George was young, but they decided to take Casertelli. Yeah, it was bad.
It was the 18th stage that you won in his honor 3 days later. When did you realize you were going to win that race, that stage rather?
Well, that's those stages at the end of the tour. They're just custom made for breakaways, right? The GC is set. It's those days are for the opportunist. And I went away in a group, and it was huge. Ironically, Johan Brunel was in that group too, but it was a huge group, and that group stays away. They never get caught, and then they basically race amongst themselves, and I just took a huge flyer. I think it was 30-40K to go. Just went away, and they'll let you go, but you're playing. You're betting that they, like a lot of times, they can't get organized. But when I went, man, I was fucking flying. It was. I knew I was. I mean, in fact, our director at the time, Henny Kuiper, who's a legendary Dutch cyclist, he kept coming up. He kept coming up and giving me time splits.
And you were gapping? You were gaining on the gap?
Yeah. And finally, I said, Henny, don't come up here anymore. I said, I'm not getting caught. Just stay back there. And I knew it, and I was just flying.
And you, did you feel a sense of like, this was for Fabio? You felt a little extra strength that day? I mean,
for sure.
I've heard so many athletes talk about that when they're, Damon Hill talking about racing after Senna died later in that season, feeling like he couldn't just make that car go fast enough. And it's almost like he looked up to the skies and just asked for some bit of help from him.
You're just floating. And I don't want to oversell our relationship or our friendship, because I didn't really know Fabio. We were on our team together. He didn't speak English. I didn't speak Italian. But nonetheless, I mean, he died in our colors, and it just doesn't happen. So it's extraordinary that it happened to us. And at that day, I was just possessed.
So going into the 96 season, that's the year you decided it was time to start moving into the high octane world, correct?
Mm-hmm. Actually, no, we made that decision in 95.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. 96, I joined Ferrari. So that was...
So in 95, you were sort of doing freestyle EPO? Managing it on your own?
Yeah. I mean, we had, there was medical care, there was guidance. I mean, this isn't, I think that would be a bad idea to just go off and do that on your own, but there was some oversight.
And would you manage it to a certain hematocrit? Was that effectively what was being done?
They weren't testing. They didn't start testing for hematocrit until, I want to say 98 or 90. They started doing the sort of morning hematocrit tests while I was out of the sport. But in 95 and 96, they didn't.
No, I don't mean the race organizers. I mean, were the doctors using hematocrit as a way to guide your EPO level and your dose?
And hemoglobin.
Yeah. So what is your normal hemoglobin? Like what is it today?
Low. Well, that's a good question. Yeah. Since we live in Aspen now, I'm sure it's probably 45 or 46, but if I lived here in Austin, it would be in the low 40s.
And so do you remember when you started doing EPO in 95, presumably they gave you enough EPO to bring your hematocrit up to 50, I would guess is where they kind of wanted you?
Well, 50 was not.
I know that there was no ceiling,
right.
But did they have concern about blood clotting and things like that?
Not at 50, and maybe not even at 60. I mean, there are people on Everest that you know better than me that have a hematocrit of 70.
So do you know how high they were pushing your crit back in 95?
Not specific. I mean, not that. it was, the answer is no, but I mean, I would remember if it had been 60 or, sort of the stories you hear from some folks, but, and also just, enough is enough, right? At some point you're competitive, you're at the front of the, why do you need to do more?
Did you feel a difference? Did you notice a difference from 94?
Oh yeah. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. It's a very effective substance.
And do you have the sense that it was being used as often in the one-day races as it was in the Grand Tours?
Absolutely, yeah.
Again, there's no reason it wouldn't help you in Paris-Roubaix just as much as it helps you on...
Absolutely. Watts are watts. I mean, if you're getting 10% more hemoglobin or hematocrit, however you want to describe it, you are also getting, at threshold, 10% more power.
Were you using a power meter yet at that point?
No, I didn't. 98 was when I first started using the SRM. The SRM, yeah, it was so good.
Yeah, well, do you remember off the top of your head what your functional threshold power was in 98?
I remember what it was in 99.
What was it?
I mean, in 99, I could, before the tour in 99, I tested on the Madone,
which was your go-to test,
that,
right?
Yeah, it was. I wasn't the first to use it. Tony Rominger used it. He had the fastest time, and
How many kilometers is Madone?
It's what's about 30 minutes.
30 minutes, and what's the grade roughly?
It's about 7-8%.
So it's a straight in the saddle pound away for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And what did you average for 30 minutes in 99?
500 watts.
Are you freaking kidding me? 500 watts for 30 minutes?
Yeah.
And at that point, you were 165 pounds?
Yep. Yeah, it was 7 watts a kilo.
All right, we got a few things to cover before we get to 7 watts per kilo. 96, you should be in top form, and you're sick as hell in the tour. You pull out.
Yep.
Bronchitis.
Yeah, I thought I was just sick.
Yeah.
And I was definitely sick of being there. It was shit weather that year, and I wasn't riding that well, and I was ready to go home.
When did you notice the testicular pain?
Certainly then, but I just, soreness, that was the first symptom, right? Just enlarged testicle, sore, on every level, sore to the touch, sore to sit on a seat. If you crossed your legs in an awkward way, it would hurt. And I thought it had to do with sitting on a bike seat all the time.
Which is, I've heard you say that before, and I've always thought it's kind of funny because you've been sitting on a bike for 10 years at that point.
I know, but then you're also...
you're rationalizing it to yourself.
Right, and I was growing up, and just even to this day, I just rarely get sick. Like, I just didn't have, and I certainly didn't think that I would ever be in that position, but and it was ignore after ignore, even as the symptoms sort of became more and more drastically significant. I just kept going. I had an excuse for all of it.
Did you have any headaches?
I had one big episode. That was right before diagnosis. Yeah. Massive headache.
Massive headache.
Massive.
Any visual changes?
The next day. Yeah. So the visual, I was here in Austin, actually. They used to have a venue south of town. What's it called? I forget, but I went to a Jimmy Buffett concert. I got a huge headache at the concert. And next day woke up, blurry vision. And even then I'm pushing through. I'm like, okay, headache because I was at a concert, maybe had a couple beers. Now you're not supposed to have the headache while you're having the beers. It's supposed to be the next day. Right. Then the blurry vision. Well, I might need to get some glasses. And then probably a week after that was the one that sent me to the doc.
Just
the
coughing up blood everywhere.
Everywhere.
That's October 2nd.
That was no, because it would have been maybe October 1st because the blood episode happened, coughing up the blood, spitting it out, and called my buddy who was a neighbor, as a doctor, said, "Yeah, I know we're here coughing up blood. Can you come look at it?" And, cosmetic surgeon, not an oncologist, sort of looked in my nose and down my throat. And, he thought, and I had rinsed out the sink.
So he didn't see how much was there.
He didn't see how much blood there was there.
Did it scare you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I obviously didn't do a good enough job telling him how much blood was in the sink. So he thought it was a sinus thing. Your sinus is dry, the crack, you cough up a little
And you
blood.
weren't putting two and two together, of course. This thing in my testes, the headache, the blood. There's no way in your mind these are all related.
Nope. And then the next day, which was October 2nd, I called him back because this pain at this point was so bad and the testicle was so swollen. I said, "Listen, there's just one other thing that I'm just embarrassed, or I haven't talked about, that this is going on." And that's when he said, "Okay, we got to get that checked out." And then that's when I drove to Jim Reeves's office on the 2nd.
What do you remember? People talk often about when a diagnosis like this is levied on them, they're not even able to process what's being said. Like, you hear some things, but you don't hear other things. Like I remember experiencing this as the one delivering this news, where you sort of try to talk as slowly as possible. You pause as much as possible, but you realize at the end of that, they probably heard a tenth of what you said. What is your recollection of the very first time this news was? Because by this point, they probably had a chest x-ray.
Well, it's one of the first things Jim Reeves did. They also did another little shot. I'll never forget this. They gave me a little shot under the skin where they were going to test a reaction. Or so. I said, "What are you doing? What's this for?" And they said, "Oh, we just want to rule out tuberculosis." And I remember thinking, "God, please give me tuberculosis." And then he wanted a chest x-ray. And I'm like, "Well, why are you, what do you need a chest x-ray for?" And then they sent me to the ultrasound, and it took, they had a young lady in there. It was the tech. She just took forever. And I thought, does she not know what she's doing? Then the actual doctor came in and repeated the test.
This was an ultrasound of your testes and your abdomen, I'm guessing?
Yeah. Yep. And then they walked in and they handed me the file, which had the chest x-ray, had the scan report, and they said, "Go back to Dr. Reeves' office. He's waiting for you." And at this point, it's like, I don't know, 6 or 7 p.m. I'm like, this is not good. And so he didn't, I can remember most of what he said because he didn't say very much. He just straight in.
Now, at the time, did they know that it was not seminomatous? So there was still a window of opportunity that this was going to be a very curable form of testicular cancer.
I think with the chest, the chest x-ray was riddled. It was more white than it was gray.
So you had
pretty good indication.
How long until you had the orchiectomy? How many days?
Next morning.
Yeah.
Because that's what I said to Reeves. I said, I feel like I should get a second opinion. And he said, "You have surgery at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning." And, keep in mind, this is in 1996. So this, the way people would process this news today, they would say, "Okay, I'm going to go home. I'm going to open my computer. I'm going to Google everything I can about whatever my doctor just told me. And I'm going to start to learn and get a bunch of information and figure out options." And none of that existed. We did not have the internet in 1996.
When did you call your mom?
Oh, right away. Yeah, right when I got home.
How was she?
My mom's always, on this, and this is, I think what makes her great and strong. She would never show weakness. So although I know she had moments where she would be sad and upset and worried, on the surface, she just had this shield. Like, let's fucking go. We got this. You could do this. So she for anything that I ever saw, she was totally confident.
Did you understand what the prognosis was at that time?
Not really. And who does, right? I mean, I know it was as advanced as it was.
Well, it wasn't just that it was advanced, right? It was the histology of it. It was not a seminomatous tumor, which is at that point really the only testicular cancer that's curable, right? You had a much more histologically advanced cancer that
choriocarcinoma,
which was wildly metastatic. What was your alpha fetoprotein level?
Well, that was elevated. The one we monitored, the closest was beta HCG.
And how high was that?
100,000.
So you were pregnant.
I know. Well, anything. Yeah, I was very pregnant. Yeah, that was, I mean, if you come in with 500, you got a problem. Anything above 2, you have a problem.
So you had the orchiectomy. They also took out lymph nodes.
We didn't didn't touch the lymph nodes, didn't touch the lungs.
When did you know you had brain mets? When did they do the CT scan?
When I got to Indiana.
So you mean you went through all of this and they still didn't know you had metastatic disease?
I originally was treated. I did my first cycle of chemotherapy here in Austin.
What was the chemo you did here?
That was traditional BEP. So I did do one. We were talking
about
one with
bleo.
Yeah, I did one cycle with bleo. Could have won 8 if I didn't do that one cycle.
Yeah, so bleomycin is a really, really toxic chemo.
Drug. Yep.
And we'll talk about it in a second when we get to Indiana, why they decided to have a little faith and play the long game. What led you to Indiana? Because again, in a pre-internet era, it wouldn't have been as clear that that was a place that was really on the cusp of doing something.
Yeah, but even
I mean, they had done the work, right?
Yeah, like my local oncologist knew. I mean, maybe even pre-internet, they still knew where the centers of excellence were.
In other words, it came from the docs here. You didn't have to go and make that decision.
Well, he had mentioned that Dr. Larry Einhorn in Indianapolis was was sort of the king when it came to testicular cancer. In fact, a lot of his work really led to platinum-based therapies really being as effective as they are. So I immediately, and he was in Australia at the time. He was lecturing in Australia, and when I heard his name, I said, I got to find this guy. And then we tried to call him, and he was off in Australia. But I did do that one. I did 4 cycles in total. The first cycle was done here in Austin, and then you go 1 week on, 2 weeks off, 1 week on, 2 weeks off. So I had 2 weeks, and that's when I first went to Houston to visit MD Anderson, and then I ended up.
Did MD Anderson also recommend bleo in the standard?
Well, they had a whole different approach. It was a much more. It was not traditional therapy, which is interesting. I mean, they much more chemotherapy, a lot more compounds. It just didn't feel right. I left.
So when you got to Indiana, did they do the CT scan first? They figure out you've got brain mets as well.
Yeah.
Is that another, what the hell is going on here? How much worse can this get moment?
Well, it was kind of yes, the answer is yes, but also a bit of a relief. You're like, okay, this has got to be the worst part of it. So like now that this is my line in the sand, it's not getting worse.
It's really, really bad, but it's not going to get worse.
Right.
So I'm just trying to understand, Lance, like at what point were you thinking I might not live here?
God, I didn't have, I mean, certainly crossed my mind, but I didn't have days where I would sit there and go, I am going to, like, I just kept, and we were doing so much, with the blood work, like we were measuring the HCG, it was coming down. They expected, I said, look, what do you want to see? Like, if this is the scoreboard,
right, what's my metric?
Yeah. What is my metric that says I'm ahead in this game? And they said a log drop off every cycle. And we were hitting it, bam, bam. It just kept coming down. And I was like, I'm kicking this thing's ass. Like, yeah, I can turn around and the body can, and the cancer can pivot and the chemo doesn't work, whatever happens. But I just felt like I got on top of it. And I didn't sit around.
And they went with this other protocol, right? They went with
instead of, well, that was the first thing they asked me. They said, okay, you're a professional cyclist. They said, do you ever want to race bikes again? And I said, I mean, if I can live, yeah, I prefer to live, but that would be cool. And they said, well, you can't keep doing bleo. And so,
yeah, it's so pulmonary toxic. It's so cardiotoxic.
And people ask, like, why wouldn't everybody be treated the way you were treated with the protocol called VIP, which doesn't indicate that you're a VIP. It's just
it's vincristine and cisplatin and blah, blah, blah.
But the downside to being treated with VIP is you have to stay as an inpatient. So bleo, you can go home, like you go into the chemo clinic for 3 or 4 hours, get your chemo, and you go home. VIP, one of those, and I forget which one, is so toxic, not on the lungs, but on the body, that you have to have 24/7 hydration. So you have to be in the hospital. And so they just don't, people want to go home.
Chemo was bad for you.
Chemo was bad at the end. Chemo is and I still talk to people about this because if they're about to start chemo, they ask me, and cycle 1, I was like, you sure you did this right? Like, I don't feel anything. Cycle 2, get sick a few times, like, ooh, okay, I think they got it right this time. Cycle 3, just sick as shit. Cycle 4, you just want to sleep. Like, it just compounds and compounds. It got much, much worse.
What was the recovery like from the neurosurgery?
Those were big cuts. I mean, they were, they're probably tennis ball size. The easiest way to describe it for people listening or have never been there is it's like, doing the pumpkin for Halloween. Like, you literally just cut the hole, pull off the thing, take out the seeds, and put the thing back on. Like, that's what, and there were 2 of them. There was one on the top and one on the back, right on the surface. So Dr. Shapiro was my neurosurgeon. He saw him, and he pulled that skull off, and right there, and they were dead.
Oh, this was done after most of the chemo?
No, it was done before halfway.
Wow.
But
the response was amazing.
But with this whole, and I don't know how, the blood-brain barrier, this barrier that prevents super toxic stuff from getting to the brain, they should not have been dead. That's why they go in there and take them out. And I'm not a surgeon or a scientist, but they take them out and they walk them over and look at them immediately in the microscope, and they were dead.
At that point in time, is there anybody you remember meeting in the hospital that kind of made you feel like you were having a shared experience with another patient? Was there any patient that sticks out to you?
No, I was kept pretty isolated. I never shared a room. I did chemo in my room. I didn't, a lot of hospitals or centers, it's like a big room with lazy boys everywhere. And you sit beside I'm Lance with testicular cancer, and you're, Gina with breast cancer, and Joe with colon, and you're all just kind of talking, watching. I was always alone in my room.
Which is interesting because it seems like very early on you sort of latched on to an important idea, right? Which was people need help navigating this system. Mm-hmm. And you obviously felt moved at a very early point in your disease and recovery to create a foundation that you ultimately would. What do you think was part of the impetus for that in your experience?
It just, even as modest as the expectations were, it was like, let's just do and you could think about it a lot of different ways. It wasn't so much about navigation at the time. It was more about, here you have a disease or a type of cancer with a huge stigma around it. You have young men that, like me, that are, if they have swelling or pain, they're not going to go out and advertise that and seek, or, most likely not seek help until it's a problem. So just trying to bring awareness to that. And, we thought we started a bike ride here in Austin. We thought we'd maybe get a few people out there, donate some money. We had no plan. I mean, but it just felt like the time to do something.
Was it sort of a pay it forward thing? Like, you were just so happy to be alive that you were like, I just have to share some of this?
Well, we started it before. I mean, we started it during. So wasn't entirely sure that there was going to be a forward, but.
It's interesting. Obviously, the foundation would grow to over $500 million in money raised. And I think what a lot of people don't appreciate, but I always appreciated, was that money was very specific and that it wasn't directed towards research. And you might say, well, God, that doesn't make sense. Shouldn't all money in cancer be towards research? But I always thought it was a really great thing that the money wasn't directed towards research, because there are a lot of dollars directed towards research and there are not a lot of dollars directed towards the other things. Yep. Research is imperative. It must be. And it should be by far the largest allocation of resources within a portfolio that's trying to address cancer. But it's this other stuff, this softer stuff of how do you help a family that can't afford the travel for, the child with cancer? How do you provide the resources for somebody? And then of course there are, you inspired a lot of other people like Fertility Hope and other people to come along and address other problems that just probably didn't get enough attention.
And on the advocacy side. Yeah. I mean, my answer I agree with everything you said. You have to raise, billions and billions, maybe even trillions to properly, I mean, there's only one person that can fund that. And that's, those are federal governments. And so, but on the advocacy side, because we ended up gaining so much power, just with the story and the brand of Livestrong. I mean, we advocated here in the state of Texas for a bond initiative that created what we called CPRIT, the Cancer Prevention Research Institute of Texas. It's a $3 billion bond initiative. We at the time, Livestrong spent about $600,000 on that initiative. So picking the best lobbyists, all the strategy, right? Well, I see the 600, but I view that as we just funded.
That's an Archimedes lever, right?
We funded $3 billion in research and prevention. So otherwise you could never go out, and you can't sell enough yellow bands to do that.
So when did you decide, not only am I well enough to come back, but and remind me, where did you already have the contract with Cofidis prior to getting sick?
Yep.
Motorola had already
folded.
Okay, so you're already officially on Cofidis.
Yep.
And then you come back, and what are they thinking?
Well, they were. I mean, before there was no. They sent a representative over. And it's crazy that they're still in the sport. They sent somebody to the U.S. to basically say, "Listen, this is probably best."
They sent somebody to evaluate you, to come and lay eyes on you.
Yeah, lay eyes on me, but then have a conversation with my agent and say, "Look, we feel like we should probably just part ways."
And your contract was a big contract, right? I mean, this was like $1 million contract.
Yep. Yeah, we didn't let them part ways.
So you were officially with that team for a year?
So 97.
Did you ride?
Nope.
Okay, so they don't renew your contract, obviously, at the end of 97.
So, and I had the other interesting thing, which I don't think has been talked about much, I had a disability policy, which typically is for, injuries, crashes, anything that, makes you disabled enough you can't turn the crank. But cancer, in a way fell under that. So I took the disability policy, or started to take it. And the deal was, if you go back and race again, then it stops.
Avoids it, yeah.
And I think it was a 3-year payout. And I thought, God, this might be a good off-ramp, right? And so until it wasn't, then I decided to stay on the highway. But
it wasn't easy, right? Because it wasn't like anyone was clamoring at your door in 98.
No, nobody was. Yeah, I mean that when we went back out to sort of shop me to teams, zero interest, right? Even not even. I mean, Postal was really not that interested.
What do you think changed their mind?
Well, the only reason, I mean, I was you have to go back, follow it backwards. But I mean, Postal, the team Postal, which was owned by Tom Weisel, had been around. I was on Weisel's team before Motorola. So I had history there. I had relationships. I had obviously a relationship with him. So maybe it was that, but it wasn't a cold call. Like I was essentially going back to Weisel's team because I left Subaru Montgomery to go to Motorola.
Now they gave you $200K or something like that as a base.
Yeah, I think that's,
and then a bunch of performance bonuses, right?
Well, I negotiated like $1,000 back then. Again, I loved and I really did. I loved the way the sport was structured, the World Cups, UCI points. You had a number one ranked rider in the world. Like that's a fucking cool deal. Like when I watch golf or tennis or
right, you know who's the best?
Yeah. Wait, Djokovic is the number one player. Well, yeah, duh. You should have Lewis Hamilton is the number one driver in F1 because he has the most points and wins. No shit. We had that in cycling. They don't have that anymore. So I pinned it to $1,000 per point. And
realistically back then, how many points would the top rider have?
Thousands.
Okay. So it's millions of dollars potentially.
Yeah, and that's what I went out and did.
Yeah.
In 98.
In 98, because you did Paris-Nice, right?
Then I quit, came home, said, fuck this, I'm out of here. I'm not cut out for this. I'm not.
Yeah, I want to talk about that race.
Yeah.
Why? What went wrong?
Just the weather and I sort of had this idea in my mind that if I did the Olympics in 1996,
But you didn't know it at the time, but you were riddled with tumors.
One flesh alone. And then looking back on it, I was like, wait, if I was that good then and I was that sick, like all this shit's gone, now I'm going to be like 10 times as strong. Which of course I wasn't. I was strong and it was good to have it out of my body, but it just caught me on a day, man. It was fucking crosswind. It was freezing. I was in the back of the Peloton split, and I'm just like, I'm going home. Literally pulled over, got in the car, went to the hotel, called Kristen. I said, we're going home.
What did she say?
She was supportive. She didn't support it. She didn't necessarily agree, but she was supportive.
It's been so long since I read your book. I mean, I read it when it came out. It's not about the bike, which probably came out in 2000. So
yeah, 2000.
But I vaguely remember in that era, you kind of vacillated back and forth between I want to ride, I don't want to ride. I want to sit around and eat tacos all day and Tex-Mex
play golf. Yeah.
And yet somewhere in there, didn't you come in fourth in the Vuelta that year?
Well, that was at the end of the year.
So was the Tex-Mex beer drinking in the spring?
That would have been, Paris-Nice in March. April, that was probably, those 6 weeks around the April timeframe. And then, it was almost like an intervention, a group of friends that were like, look, man, like, I get it. Like you don't want to do it anymore, but just go back and finish the season. Like just start riding, start training. Just don't go out like that. Like just finish the season. And I said, okay, I'll do that. So I just started riding, but no structure, just riding. I'd go out here in Austin. And I rode a lot, like 4, 5, 6 hours every day, just riding.
But this is the season. So what are your teammates doing at this point?
They're out racing. They're out racing. Yeah, they're racing.
And the team doesn't care that you're not there because they're not paying you anything anyway, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And I believe I went to the US Pro, the course dates in Philly. And then I flew to Europe and did my first race back was Tour of Luxembourg.
You win that.
Won that. Then I went to Germany, did another race and won that. These are stage races, short stage races, 5-day races.
And you've reintroduced EPO at this point.
Yep.
By the way, I forgot to ask you this. Post orchiectomy, wouldn't you have had a medical exemption for testosterone at that point?
I don't think you can, in any sport, could you get that?
Yeah, but
I never.
But didn't you have to start taking more testosterone after you had your testicle removed?
No, Not necessarily.
Do you know if you were producing normal amounts?
Always on the lower end, but nothing that was, problematic or something that you said, listen, this is going to cause further issues down the line. But not, obviously not on the.
And the other thing I meant to ask you, Lance, did you at some point during the period of your cancer recovery think, man, did that growth hormone amplify this in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah.
Or any of the other anabolic agents particularly? There's no way EPO would have, but what was your thought on some of the other drugs you'd used?
Well, that certainly crosses your mind. And HGH, there was just very pre-diagnosis, there was very little of that anyways, only in 96, which was, of course, the year that I got sick. But
which, by the way, seems to me the least performance-enhancing drug for a cyclist.
And by the way, we never went back. Yeah. I mean, Ferrari was like, don't need it. Never went back.
So really the mainstay of drug when you came back was EPO.
Yep. And cortisone.
And it's amazing that cortisone helped that much, huh?
Yeah, I'm surprised you haven't. It's
how
helpful.
Would you guys administer it? Intramuscularly?
Yeah. It's helpful to shed weight primarily. And especially as a bulkier guy, trying to shed upper body muscle.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
Unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
So 98 comes to an end. You finish unbelievably, right? Fourth in the Vuelta.
I was fourth in everything. Fourth at the Vuelta, fourth at the World's TT, fourth at the World's Road Race. I just was like, shit, I'm fourth in everything. But I got 1,000+ UCI points that Tom Weisel had to pay.
Well, not only that, but you've done it kind of not at your best, right? Like you're only, you really only came back into shape for 9 months. So you decide at the end of 98, no, I'm coming back in 99. Like now I'm all in.
Yep.
At that point,
hired Brunel.
Okay.
That was the big, the team was.
Who was the director sportif?
Johnny Welts was the director sportif in 98. And this, Peter, when I say this team was unorganized, like you cannot believe it. It was such a shit show.
I remember 98. So I remember because I was in my second year of medical school, and I just remember there was a group of guys, we would go riding every Saturday and Sunday morning. And we would, first of all, I was so excited that you were back, but we would joke about like go Postal having the two meanings, like you're cheering for Postal team and you're going crazy because it's just so disheveled and
Well, we had, and I'll never forget this. I mean, Johnny was so disorganized and he would they wouldn't pay the soigneurs and that Vuelta that I ended up getting fourth in. We'll walk down one day at breakfast table and everybody's good. There's no soigneurs. I said, where's the fucking soigneurs? And I said, they walked out. I said, wait a minute. We were in the middle of a grand tour. We have to have mechanics, soigneurs. Like, what the fuck is going on? They just walked out because they weren't
getting paid.
So sketchy. And I'm sitting there going, okay, I think I'm back. I said, but I'm not gonna put up with this shit. Like this is ridiculous. This is just amateur hour. And Johan was retiring, and I got his number. Marcel Busio, German guy, gave me his number.
He wore the yellow jersey for a day back in 96.
Maybe he was, those sprinters, right? They win the early stages, they get the jersey. Yeah. But I just called him. I said, "What do you?" It's funny, we didn't really like each other when we raced. We always just sort of butted heads, but he was always at the front of the race. Like he going back to what I was saying earlier about knowing the race, like knowing where to be, knowing just the energy of this thing. He knew it, and he spoke all these languages, and I thought that would be good. And I just called him and I said, "What are you going to do now that you're retiring?" And he was actually either wanting to start or somebody asked him to be a part of a cycling union, which that would have been a great use of his time. And I said, "Listen, I got an idea. Like, why don't you come be the director?" He was like, "Are you kidding me?" "No." And I said,
because the travel, it's basically it's not retiring.
I mean, that's just not what he thought he would be doing. But I convinced him.
So this is a topic that it's such a controversial topic, but I really want to understand this, right? People consistently say, look, yes, we know everybody doped during that era, but U.S. Postal was different because they did it at an industrial level. It was much more systemic. So let's kind of unpack what that means.
Right.
So you had already been working with Ferrari, and I've never met Ferrari. He's actually a guy I would always want to meet because I think, despite how much he's been demonized, I just think he's probably a very smart physiologic wizard.
He's incredibly smart.
And like, how much of your training was he actually guiding?
All of it.
So did Carmichael, who gained fame being associated with you and being your coach, did he do anything?
He not at that stage. Yeah, he was, as an amateur. I mean, he was the Olympic coach in '92, but once I went, started seeing Ferrari, Chris was just a, advisor, friend. No, but we are talking about two very different skill sets here.
Yeah,
and I'm not talking about doping. I mean, just in terms. I mean, Michele Ferrari, you can say what you want, and you and I calling him intelligent or bright or smart or even genius, just drives people crazy.
No, but I've heard him in interviews talk about the nuanced level of
physiology. Yeah. I mean, he's top 3 of all time. And so we're talking about two different types of.
Yeah. So you said earlier, look, you had no aspiration of winning the Tour, right? Did that change when you placed 4th in the Vuelta? Was that the first aha moment that says I can win this thing?
Yep. And when Johan finally decided to come, take me up on my offer, he said it. He said, "You're gonna." He and I'll never forget. He said, "You are going to finish on the podium."
In '99.
In '99. I said, "You're crazy. There's no way." But
you didn't think so with your confidence?
Yeah, nah. I mean, that's first of all, the Vuelta is not the Tour.
I understand, but
so getting 4th in the Vuelta, to me that sort of equates to maybe top 10, which, by the way, would have been a great result. But he was 100% sure. He said, "You're gonna."
At that point in time, so in '98, Pantani had won. In '97, Ulrich had won. How much time had you spent riding alongside those two?
Well, in the grand scheme, not much.
So did you have a sense of how you'd stack up against them?
No, because I didn't. I had never been in a grand tour at my peak form, their peak form. I mean, I was, just guessing.
And I don't remember, why were they not there in '99?
Well, Pantani had the
he got
thing
popped.
at the Giro. Got
that's
the
right.
hematocrit test, and I want to say Jan. I mean, he also had, of course, you and I offline have talked a lot about Jan Ulrich, but I think he had another thing where maybe he tested positive for something happened. Like he wasn't there.
So you show up at '99, and the two best Tour riders are not there.
That's right. The previous two winners. I still remember my couch where I sat and watched the prologue. Yep.
That July day. And explain to people why the prologue matters. Like, it's not a long stage. It's like an 8.5 kilometer time trial.
Yeah, but you can.
But what's the importance of it?
Well, it's first and foremost and they don't always do it anymore, which I completely disagree with. I think it's
the baddest thing in the world.
Of course, it's the only way to start a tour. It allows the rider, especially the GC guys, to really test their condition, not just their own, but against the other guys. And you can, if you put 30 seconds in a climber, 30 seconds is 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So it's and that was a tough one. I mean, that was it had a serious climb sort of halfway through. It was enough that you could make some separation. So. But there's certain things that the Tour de France should always have. It should always have a prologue. It should always have a team time trial. It should always, and they've really gone away from that for some reason, but thankfully not then.
You win the prologue.
Easily.
Your first yellow jersey.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, never even. I mean, it was just. I mean, we thought we were in a dream.
Now, remind me, in that tour, you were not using blood transfusions. It was all EPO.
Right.
And it was, you didn't microdose. You were just giving straight regular doses. You didn't. This is before they had a test for EPO.
Yep. The only thing they had was the hematocrit test.
And do you remember where you kept your hematocrit at that tour? Was that this is when you were having to stay at about 50?
No, 50 would be too close, because if you had to stay around 46, 47, because if even this, I mean, 47,
you get dehydrated,
yep. and or you get sick, or and they show up, like you're done.
I don't think so. Something people don't realize is in 1996, Reese won the tour. So finally unseeds Induran. His hematocrit was somewhere between 60 and 66 during that race.
That's what they say. I mean, we weren't there with the spinner, but the nickname Mr. 60%.
Yeah, his nickname's Mr. 60. So what changed so much? Was it Festina in 98 that basically brought the hammer down and said, we're done with these guys walking around with hematocrits in the 60s?
Yep.
So is it that much of a difference if you're walking around hematocrit is 42, 44 and you're racing 46, 47? Or is it, because this has always been my take on it, it's not so much how you're functioning on the beginning of the tour, it's that at the end of the tour you could keep your hematocrit there when ordinarily it would really start to dwindle as you break down.
Yeah, but when the test came around, then you just knew that it would drop. But obviously, the GC guys at least found ways around that, and that's where the transfusions came in, and which is effectively the same thing. Yeah, right.
Was there anybody on the postal team that year that was not doing EPO?
Not that I'm aware of.
And how much were you guys commingling information? So you were seeing Ferrari, but I assume everyone wasn't seeing Ferrari, right?
No, a lot of them were. But the team also had trainers and doctors, and had its own setup.
Was that the year Moto Man was going around?
Yeah, it was 99.
It was 99.
Yeah, I thought that was a great idea. It's
and do you think
looking back on it, it's like it's just like,
well, it's a movie.
I mean, it's fucking crazy. Like what? Oh God. Yeah, that was 99.
I don't know if this is still the case, but I believe at the time you won in 99, you were the only person to not only win the tour, but win each of the 3 individual time trials as well.
Yep. Well, yeah, the prologue and then the 2 long
prologue
ones.
And then
we had long time trials back then.
60K at least, right?
55, 60, yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you're the best and it's that long, you're going to win.
You win that year. Do you think to yourself, Ulrich wasn't here, Pantani wasn't here. Of course. Can I win this thing when they're both there?
And not to mention, I mean, with that big crash early in the race, I mean, Zula lost 7 minutes. I mean, Zula was close in the race. If you back out that accident or the huge crash,
he was within about a minute, right?
Yeah, it would have been close. And he was Zula's. I mean, even if by saying Pantani and Ulrich aren't there, I mean, you still had Zula, Escartine, Olano. I mean, you can't minimize those guys.
What was we almost take it for granted now, but at the time, how much scrutiny was there over your performance that year?
A lot. Yeah.
That was the year of the cortisone.
Yep.
Yeah.
It started. And it was the year after Festina. I mean,
so the
Pope could have won the tour, and they would have questioned it.
Yeah. So what? Prior to this, you'd never really been on the hot seat, right? So you'd been using the drug, but nobody really cared because you weren't winning the race. So now you're winning the race.
I wasn't in the crosshairs.
So where do you think the posture came of this is how my denial is going to be? And was in retrospect, was there another way to deny without attacking? Because I got to be honest with you, I don't really remember what the attack mode was like in 99 versus 05. Like there's a spectrum of attack.
You would have to be you'd have had to be in the press conferences. You'd have questions about the race and questions about whatever. And then somebody in the corner would holler and just, they were just asking a question. Felt like an attack at the time, felt like an attack on me. I said, excuse me? What the fuck are you talking about? I mean, literally like that. Like, just let's go. What
did your teammates say? Did anybody pull you aside and say, Lance, you got to back this down, man?
No, but they wouldn't have done that. There are others, and maybe Johan. Johan, no, but Johan's we are like brothers. I mean, he would answer. He would do the same thing. It might have been better somebody here locally where my whole operation was run out of to go. You know what? Feels like we may want to back this down a little bit. Just let it go. And anyways.
How many other people in your life knew at the time? Obviously your wife must have known.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think that's a good question. I mean, it wasn't something that I offered up, but I mean,
did your mom know?
Nope.
Did she ever ask?
Nope.
And what did your wife say?
Very little. I mean, I think she just assumed, I mean, look, it was that level of the sport and that level of doping, you cannot keep that. If you live with a person, that is not going to be a secret.
But did she ever say something like, Lance, is this worth it? If we're playing the long game.
Think I've never had this conversation with her, but, and this is my point, is that if you have no ability to keep this a secret from your spouse or whoever you're living with. We're in Europe. I have my teammates. They have the wives clubs. I think the wives, the conversation was like, this is just part of the job. Because they certainly all knew.
So in 2000, you come back. I want to ask you about Ventoux. What was going on between you and Pantani there? Were you guys talking? I was trying to tell him that I was going to give him the win, which is one of the biggest regrets in my career. Why?
Because you don't, and it's, not on the Ventoux. And that's why, I mean, Merckx called me when I was on the car ride down. He said, you don't ever gift the Ventoux. Ever.
Why did you want to gift it to him?
I was going to win the Tour. I knew I was going to win the Tour. I was just, I was actually trying to be gracious and be sort of the patron of the peloton. Like, look, I don't need to win everything here. You go win the Ventoux and you go. But in hindsight, God, and may he rest in peace. I mean, I'm not talking about Pantani. I'm just talking about, I'm talking about the Ventoux, right? Which is just, you just don't give that one away.
And Merckx called you on the car ride down.
Yeah. This is a huge mistake. You never gift the Ventoux.
Is Merckx the greatest cyclist of all time?
Of course.
Different
sport, but
if Merckx were riding today, with the sport being so much more specialized, where would he choose to focus his energy? Would he be on the Grand Tours?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Very different sport now, though. I mean,
Half Man, Half Bike is a biography of Merckx that I love. And you gave me one of the most amazing gifts ever, which is that book that sits on my coffee table.
I was psyched.
Dude,
I saw it and I was like, oh, Peter has one of those too. And I was like, wait, you dumbass, you gave it to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a cool book.
It's unbelievable. I would recommend anybody who's interested in cycling reading Half Man, Half Bike, because you can't really understand what he did. Like, what does it mean to win 5 Giros, 5 Tours, every single day classic, the 1 hour record? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. So now in that, who was second that year? Was that Beloki? Was he, or was that Ulrich that year?
No, in 2000, Jan got second, I believe.
Is that when you guys began? You've said before that of all the guys you've ever raced, you've never respected anyone more than Jan. Obviously, we're going to talk about Jan a little later. Your respect and your love for Jan post-cycling is, he's a brother to you.
Yep.
Did it begin in that Tour in 2000?
It was more intense. I mean, he was, I didn't, I viewed him as a real enemy and a rival and fuck this guy. And I'm like, but And when I say, I mean, when I talk about Jan and what he drove in me was just, I was fully convinced that he was the most talented, that he was the biggest fear. That like if anything every morning got you up and it was pissing rain outside and you had 5 hours on the schedule, like you better get out there. It was Jan Ulrich that got me out. None of these other guys. They're all good. They're all, I'm sure, nice guys, but none of them inspired me like him.
Yeah, you probably didn't know it at the time, but how much you guys had in common, right? In terms of your upbringing.
Yeah. Jan's had a complicated upbringing.
What's your biggest memory from 01 and 02? Which was the year you began having suffered a broken collarbone? Didn't you fall and break?
No, in Dauphiné, that was 03.
So going into 03,
01 was probably physically my best tour. I mean, 01 it was, that's, everybody refers to it as the look, and
what was your time, or what was your wattage up Madone in 01?
All those years were 500 watts.
500 watts for 30 minutes.
Yeah. And loving it.
And like, what do you think? What do you think your wattage would have been without EPO?
Well, it would have been 450. I'm telling you, it is 10%.
You think it's a full 10%?
Yeah, 10%.
7 watts per kilo.
450 is still pretty good, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, look, Bradley Wiggins probably put out 440 to 450 during his 1 hour record, which was...
That's more impressive. That's flat.
Yeah, and you're kinked.
Yeah.
So it's really hard because you're bent over.
Yeah.
The look.
Yeah.
How deliberate was that?
I wasn't looking at Jan.
What were you looking at?
I was looking, I knew I was about to send it. And I thought, man, I feel good, but if this doesn't work, I'm going to need somebody to bail me out. So I'm going to need a teammate. And Chechu was the last guy with me. And so I was looking back just to make sure that Chechu, and it was just the angle of the photo, but I was looking back to make sure that he was
going to come with you.
Well, that he was close.
Yeah.
That I could still had him in sight. And so, but just the way the photo was captured, it looked like I was looking directly at Jan, which I wasn't.
03, you've got to be a little worried going into that, right? Because you're pretty depleted on red blood cells, aren't you?
03 that's when I had a pretty big crash in the Dauphiné right before. Huge crash, actually.
And that's when you couldn't just give yourself EPO willy-nilly. I think by then we had an EPO test, right?
Yeah, but not, I mean, out of competition, you could.
Yes, but I think, what was your hematocrit at the beginning of 03? Didn't you come in at like a 42 or something?
38. At the start.
So you came in
pre-race check, 38.
38. How many
but
bags?
We didn't do, just so you know, and so we're clear, we didn't do, after 99, we never did EPO on the tour.
You mean you did it out of season? I mean, you did it out of competition still.
And then Ferrari had to switch to transfusion.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought that happened in 02. So you're saying from 2000 on, it was 2 bags during the race?
No, 2000. First year was 2000. We did 1 bag.
1 bag at what stage?
So that halfway through. So that first day at Hautacam, that was with nothing. That was before the bag.
How are they not catching the jump in hematocrit that comes?
I don't know.
You were not worried about, hey, one day my hematocrit's 41 and the next day it's 47?
Right, yeah.
How close were you to understanding the UCI's algorithm for testing? I mean, at this point, you're becoming... I mean, one of the things that people have always said is, hey, Lance had the UCI in his pocketbook.
Right. Yeah, that's not... Listen, we can go down all these rabbit holes, all the stuff that's, I mean, and I'm not, I'm sort of done with that part of my life where I have to contest everything. It's like, but in its totality, if we just put them all on a whiteboard and said, they said this, then this, and I mean, you cannot believe, and I'm not, this is where I just don't need to go one by one, but if you look at it in total, you cannot believe how much bullshit was out there. I mean, yes, the pillars are true, but most of it is just total bullshit.
I mean, I think the point is
I mean, by the way,
it's turning a blind eye.
By the way, Peter, a month ago, they had a 30-minute program on French TV convincing themselves that they had figured out that I had an engine in my bike, and that they figured out, I'm not kidding. They figured out where the switch was.
Are you joking?
I'm not joking. I am dead serious. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, and I don't know if you ever noticed this, but I would always sort of grab my chamois.
Okay.
Like I would always like kind of adjust my chamois. I had this whole theory that, that the ass and the chamois and the seat have to line up. That's peak power. Like it's perfect balance and all this shit. And so I would always, and this is on network television.
There's the switch.
The switch was in the shorts.
Of course.
I mean, this is a really dumb example, although it's a true story that they aired this. But most of it I'm just like, and fortunately I've gotten myself to a point in life where it's like,
so
whatever.
Going into that last time trial in 2003, you and Jan were really close.
Well, yeah. I mean,
you were not that far ahead of him, right? You were inside a minute, maybe?
Yeah, inside a minute.
Talk to me about that time trial. I've heard you talk about...
It might have been less. But that wasn't the fear or the stress around it was not so much...
No, it was the checkpoint, right? It was he gained... How much did he take out of you?
Well, but the bigger stressor was how much he took out of me in the first time trial. I think he took 2 minutes out of me. So you're thinking, okay, you got 45 seconds.
What stage was that?
That was the first one?
Yeah.
I don't know. It was early. Cap de Couvert. It was
right. So that's when your hematocrit's 38.
Yeah. So you're going, well, you've got 45-second lead. He took 2 minutes out of you in the first. I mean, everybody said it's over. He's gonna catch him.
I remember that like it was yesterday.
And he put
day,
pouring rain. He put 6 seconds on me in the first kilometer.
How many K was the time trial?
Long, 50-ish.
So what went through your mind at that point?
Johan didn't tell me that.
He didn't tell you how much? Okay.
6 seconds in 1 kilometer?
No, it's unbelievable.
You fucking get off the bike.
Yeah.
Like, I'm done.
Did you feel you were redlined?
Oh, yeah. It was terrible.
And were you using your power meter at that point or mostly heart rate?
But most of we didn't race with power meters. Trained, 100% of the time with them, but not in the races. So it wasn't just heart rate.
Yeah. When did they tell you that he fell?
Right away. I mean, Johan's watching the race on TV in the car as he's driving. Yeah, right away. And then I knew. It was over.
The other thing about 03 was Beloki, right?
Beloki.
I still don't understand how you avoided that.
Well, of all the things that ever happened to me in the tour, I get asked about that. I mean, it's not even close. I mean, the ride through the field, that's the one. I mean, even people that don't follow it, they're like, man, remember that one time like you fucking rode across that field? I was like, yeah, I do remember, but incredibly lucky. I mean, he very unlucky for Joseba, but if you go back and rewatch, and it's, of course, there's 100 versions of it on YouTube, but if you go back and rewatch exactly what happened, right? So he's leading, flying downhill. It's a 100-degree day. It's these bad roads that they would patch the whatever with tar. The tar was literally boiling, and he just his tire caught some hot tar and he just hindsighted him and ended his career. And I had a choice. I said, I either lay this thing down, right, or go left.
How many miles an hour were you going?
Oh, we were going 40 miles an hour. And I said, I'm going to go left. Well, now, keep in mind, the story ends with me not just riding through the field, but having to get off my bike and jump down on the road. Well, that whole field, you can go back and watch it on YouTube. So there are massive ditches. The split second that I said, I'm going left, there was a path. What are the chances? There was a path into the field where the farmer would go in and out with his tractor. What are the chances? I mean, 5 feet to the right, 5 feet to the left at 40 miles an hour is like that.
Yeah.
And I go straight into the side of the ditch. So, I mean, what are the chances that that path is there? And I get in this field and it's just dry. I'm no farmer, but it was like dry crop, sharp. And I was like, man, this shit is sharp. Like, I better not get a flat. And I'm just like looking down going, come on, man. And I got to the other side and I could see that it was way down. I was like, I better get off this thing. And just, what are the chances?
Well, the other one that you must get asked about a lot, and I don't remember which year it was when your handlebar got caught.
Same year.
Was that also 2003? I mean, a comedy of errors.
I know.
And by that point, clearly you and Jan had established an amazing respect because that's when he waited.
Yep. Yeah, Jan is, Jan is he's a total gentleman. So, yeah, that was, hit the kid's bag and just straight down. Bike was broken, which we didn't know at the time, but that's the whole chainstay was snapped. But yeah, Jan waited up.
So let's fast forward to the end of 2005, right? You've won 7. You, at the time, said, look, I want to spend more time on the foundation. I want to spend more time with the family. I assume those were the real reasons you wanted to retire.
I think that's right. Yeah, I mean,
when you came back, was it LeBlanc wrote an open letter basically telling you not to, right? What was that about?
He, Jean-Marie LeBlanc was an icon. I mean, he was the director general of the tour. All of the, he was, and I think, and he'll go down as being viewed as one of the greatest directors ever. And a very, very tough guy. It was his way or the highway, and you just didn't cross Jean-Marie. But the sport had started to, I retire, Landis wins, Landis tests positive. So it was a Festina-esque moment in time in cycling. And yet another shift to like guys looking around going, wait a minute, all right. We might be extinct here if we don't fucking clean this up. And so the sport was shifting to a better place.
Yeah.
And Jean-Marie's point was, look, you are a bridge to the past, right? So this sport has evolved. You are part of the old culture, and it's not good for this. And you know what? He's exactly right. So I remember when he wrote it, and I think they printed it in the 2 big political papers, or Le Monde and Le Figaro. I think it was in Le Figaro. And I just thought, and it was interesting because I was in West Texas with Anna out in Marfa, one of my favorite places. And
where you just went recently.
Yep. And we had just gotten together. She'd just gotten pregnant. But she wasn't with me when I raced before. And we were out there and we went to this is so crazy. We were in Fort Davis outside of Marfa and went to this lunch spot. And I said, this is a mistake.
Coming back.
Yeah. I said, I can't, I shouldn't do this.
By the way, did LeBlanc actually call you as well to follow up?
Not that I remember.
Do you think he would have been more persuasive?
No.
So why did you do it?
Well, it was, the wheels were in motion. Like it was I felt a ton of, responsibility
to the foundation.
Yeah, all of it. I mean, all the sponsors were excited. The foundation was excited. And it would have been so easy to, and it felt like quitting. Like you can call me a lot of things. You cannot call me a quitter. I don't quit at anything. But it would have been easy to say, routine, he tried on some bullshit and just got out. And you would have been 3 days of press where it's like, oh, what happened?
And your view at that point is the sport's clean. So there's no risk to me because I don't need to use anything because no one else is using anything. Was that kind of your view?
that was the best I could tell. Yeah. I mean, I knew I wasn't that, so that sort of phase 2 or phase whatever, the comeback years was clean. Absolutely. And ironically, Ferrari was the one who was adamant. He's like, they are coming for you. And so he was, we just didn't cross the line.
So 09 is kind of close, right? You're third. Mm-hmm. And then 10.
No, but it wasn't close. I mean, it wasn't close at all. But third is third.
I mean, meaning you're on the podium.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember reading an article in the fall of 2009, and I think it was like an ESPN magazine, that was comparing your 09 tour to Jordan's comeback, his second comeback, mm-hmm. but the year they didn't win, right? Because remember, he came back for mm-hmm. the last part of the season in 95. And then they're like, well, wait till you see Lance in 10, because that's going to be that's going to be Jordan's 96 mm-hmm. or whatever it was when they went. So what did you think after 2009? Did you ever think, you know what, I gave this a great go. It would be totally respectable to just retire right now, to be off the sport for 3 years, 4 years, come back, be on the podium. Now I can retire. Right. What made you come back, and what made you stay back, especially when it meant building a new team?
Yeah. Well, that was a big part of it. I mean, being able to not be on a team from Kazakhstan, literally.
Team Borat.
Yeah. And build a whole new team. I mean, that was...
But at this point, Lance, you're 30...
I'm old. I mean, I was old in 05.
30...
That was 34 years old when I won.
Yeah, like wasn't it getting a bit old in terms of the training?
But again, this machine was rolling. Like I wasn't going to be the guy to say, I'm getting off the wave here. Like I just...
But what part of the machine at this point? Because from a personal wealth standpoint at that point, you're going to get those sponsors even if you're not riding, aren't you?
I don't know. I mean, it seems... It's
like so how much of this, what I'm trying to get at is how much of this was filling a void that said, I don't like sitting around and not being an athlete.
Right. But that's not the point. The point is, I mean, every day of that comeback, I was like, what the fuck am I doing? Like it wasn't, Anna and I had this conversation the other night. I was like, because somebody asked or it came up and I was like, God, it's like, I am never in my life, I am never going back to that place where you're looking around going, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? You're not going to win the tour, and you're not, like, what the fuck are you doing? And then as it led, down, all the investigations started, and then you're trying to do both. You're trying to defend your reputation, defend your livelihood, defend everything, and having to do one of the hardest sports in the world. I was just like, get me out of here.
When did you realize that you had to tell the truth?
I think when I knew that they either interviewed George or George went to the grand jury, I knew that was...
So fall of 12, basically.
I don't know. It might have been earlier. Yeah.
It's funny. This is going to sound incredibly naive. I actually believed you guys were not on PEDs at the time. So my view was either you all are or you are not, mm-hmm. right? Like, meaning the GC contenders. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily mean everybody in the race, but my view was either all the GC contenders are or they are not. And I truly believed that post 98 that you guys were off.
Right. Well, you were wrong.
I was absolutely wrong. But the moment I realized how wrong I was not with Landis. It was actually with Tyler. Mm-hmm. Landis didn't come across as very believable. Tyler did. Mm-hmm. And so I've lost track of time, but Tyler's book that he wrote with Dan Coyle, did that come out in like 2011? Does that sound about right?
Maybe 2010.
Yeah. It was when I read Tyler's book that I was like, this guy's way too freaking believable. Mm-hmm. And if he's saying this and he's saying that this is what they were all doing, like I believe it now. Mm-hmm. And then it was kind of a question.
He had a different version in his deposition in the postal case, but.
Oh, see, I don't know what his deposition said.
Yeah, I mean, it was when anybody's deposed and they've written a book, I mean, they're just going to read you the book.
Yeah.
And go, did you say this? And is this true? They just read, they go page by page.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And, some of it was, he agreed, he said, but then if it was in any way sort of contradictory towards him or somebody he cared about, and then he would blame Dan. I will never forget. He's like,
that's right, because he had co-author.
He said that's a Danism. I was like, wait a minute. Anyways,
so it's late 11 or whatever, and you're basically like, I got to come clean.
11, 12.
Or 12, yeah. 12. You've talked about your reasons for doing the interview with Oprah, which I think make a lot of sense, right? Which is, if you're going to give a deposition, you might as well do it on your terms.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And even that, I mean, looking back, well, you can look back all you want, right? I did what I did. I was convinced that it was the right thing to do. The lawyers hated it. Whether it was Oprah or Tom Brokaw, who was my other option, it wasn't gonna help.
What was that period like when you went? I think you went to Hawaii right after, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I went to. We still traveled a lot, just to kind of get away. And
did any of the sponsors call you to quietly thank you for what you had done over the past 15 years?
No.
I know they can't publicly, but did someone at Trek say, "Hey, Lance, I hope you understand we've got to dump you like a hot potato, but you did turn us into $1 billion company"?
No.
No sponsor in any one of your relationships ever thanked you for what you'd done?
No. I mean, I think there is a general. I mean, ironically, use Trek as an example. So the answer is no. But if you asked Mike Senyard from Specialized, he would say thank you.
Because you raised the tide.
All the ships rose.
Luke was obviously old enough to know what was going on. Were the twins?
Yep. They were. I mean, they were young, but they were. Yeah.
So what was the discussion like with them?
I just took my conversation was, I know, basically just an open door policy. Certainly if anything comes up at school, but if you ever have any questions about my life and the decisions I've made, or you hear something like we're not going to have one conversation about this. We're going to have as many as you want to have. Like, it is just totally open door.
And what have they asked you about?
Not very much. Yeah. I mean, but they're like, what are they going to ask? Like, they're going to ask questions like you're asking, because you know the sport so well, and you're the good, the bad, the ugly, right? Yeah. They And I feel like we stayed, all of us, and certainly a lot of credit to Kristen as well. I mean, we've stayed very close as a family. And when I say family, I mean, myself, my kids, Anna and Kristen, and now Anna and I's kids. Like, it is, if you can imagine that Brady Bunch setup, we are a very close family.
So after the Oprah interview, which I guess is early 2013, who was the first person you reached out to apologize to?
Well, there was some. Well, I mean, actually, before the interview was, I reached out because I knew that it would, they would see it. So the Andreus, Lamont, and Kathy and Greg wouldn't take my call.
Have they to this day?
We did meet up.
You met with Greg and
Kathy. Yep.
How long ago?
Oh God, it's been years.
How was that meeting?
I thought the meeting went better than I thought it would go. Their version of the meeting. I mean, we don't have enough time in this day to time. It was, I was sincere. I said what I felt like I needed to say. They accepted the apology, but.
What about Emma?
Emma and I met up in Florida. Emma's great, man. She's, Emma's mission all along was not to get me. Her mission was to try to fix
talk about the sport.
To fix the sport.
Maybe not everybody listening knows who Emma is.
Emma was my soigneur, 99, and left the team and was a person that I went after.
And she got mixed up in this because of the LA Confidential book. She was quoted in it. Yeah. As you said, it ended up being really about you, but the only reason my understanding is the reason she agreed to talk with David Walsh was really to make a broader statement about how corrupt the sport was.
Yeah. And I tell you, I've enjoyed sort of reforming that friendship, and I wrote the foreword for her book, and she's a cool lady.
What about any of your former teammates? Have you reconnected with Tyler? I know you have strong feelings about Floyd.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, those are the two names that stick out. I mean, the reality is 95% of that former, what was known as the Blue Train, we'd still all go. I mean, we'd go all jump back into war together. Like we're like brothers. Floyd and Tyler, they were never our brothers, and so there won't be any future dinners.
I remember a while ago your Twitter bio was different than it is now. Do you remember what it used to say?
No, what did it say? I don't even know what it says now.
Today it says like, I don't know, something boring like everybody else's, but it used to say. There's a reason the windshield's bigger than the rear view mirror.
Right. Yeah.
I'll tell you, I've always found that, I don't know who that quote is attributed to. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it appears in many formats, but I always found it to be very poignant because it's not saying you should only have a windshield and no rear view mirror. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's not saying you should have no windshield and only a rear view mirror. It's saying you need both, but one's bigger than the other.
Yeah.
But in my own life, I've always felt like I have to have a rear view mirror.
Yeah.
Like I never want to lose sight of my sins.
Right.
Because they kind of ground me.
Of course.
When I think of all of again, you've had both the luxury and the inconvenience of living all of your sins on the world's most public stage. Right. So most of us make all of our mistakes behind closed doors, and nobody really gets to see the horrible things we've done. I remember when I hit the 1-year anniversary of doing something so awful, I couldn't stand my existence for it. And I remember talking to my therapist about it, and she said, I actually don't want you to ever forget this. Like, I want you to remember what you did, because you have to remember that the monster that did that thing, he's never going to die.
Right.
He'll sit in the corner. He'll be small, but he's never going to die.
Well, if you have the tools in place you
can keep him in a box.
Keep him in the corner. Right.
Are there moments that you look back at, like, do you look at that SCA deposition in October of 2005 and think, like, I need that video playing over and over again, just quietly?
Yeah, it's totally embarrassing. I mean, a lot of that shit, and I was forced to rewatch a ton of that, not because I wanted to or I thought it would be a good idea, but I mean, in legal settings and depositions and trials, and like they just hammer you with this, but it's. Yeah, you look at that and you're like, that is a pathetic person. Like that, I ain't never going back there. And I mean, those sort of things, as unfortunate and as embarrassing and as tough as they are to watch, they're actually, for me, those are good. I mean, I don't want to do it every day, but it's like that guy needed to die, right? And a new guy needed to come around, and yeah, that's where you get stuck. You say, "Oh, wouldn't change a thing," and all these things that I would say that would, actually, I mean, you would change things, right? I mean, you would. I mean, I love the spot that I've been able to get to. So you sort of think in your mind, like, well, these were all events that shaped the person sitting here today, but there would have been a better way to go about it.
Yeah, it's funny. I was watching a video of an interview you did a while ago, and I normally don't read comments on YouTube because they're so incredibly uninteresting and ridiculous. And I don't know why, but for some reason I read a couple, and I came across one that I thought was so interesting. I actually copied it down. I want to read it to you.
Okay.
So it was an interview. I don't even remember what interview it was, but not surprisingly, a lot of the comments were like, "This guy's a horrible human being." Yeah. Like, what a ridiculous person. Oh, I know. It must have been the interview where you said, and you tried to offer a nuanced explanation for why you wish you didn't have to hurt people, but you also wouldn't have done it different in the sense that you needed to learn the lessons you learned. Do you remember this interview?
Yes.
I think it was on NBC.
These were all the ones that...
Yeah. So not surprisingly, every commenter is like ripping you apart.
Of course.
And this one guy writes something. I'm just going to read to you verbatim. And I was really moved by it. He says, "I was not a good person, and it took losing everything to realize it. I'm not yet at the point where I would not change a thing. But I do get the I can't change a thing, so it's useless to feel as much regret and shame as I do. I really believe him when he says that he values the lessons he learned, because I do too. I might not be a good person yet, I'm learning, but I'm no longer a bad one."
Yeah. Those are few and far between. I mean, it takes a lot of, it's amazing, but, comment. I mean, I don't read comments. Yeah, I just can't. I mean, and it's, I used to read comments, but I don't.
Something about the last line of this.
Yeah.
I might not be a good person yet, but I'm no longer a bad one.
Exactly.
I mean, I remember feeling like when I went through that transition of, okay, like you're not the worst human in the world. Right. You're not perfect, and you're never going to be. But I still don't understand a couple of things about the sport. Now we could explain all day long why you ended up where you ended up, right? Everybody will say, well, it's not, it went from, once it became clear how widespread EPO use was in the peloton and blood transfusing and all that stuff, it became very difficult to say, well, Lance is a bad guy because he did these performance enhancing drugs, because to a first order, you did them no more or no less than anybody else. So then it turned into, well, he treated people so badly, and that's why Lance is the worst person. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't explain to me why, Ivan Basso, who did everything that Pantani did, is loved, and Pantani was completely vilified and, effectively killed himself. Mm-hmm. It doesn't explain why, well, pick your favorite German rider who's loved, and Ulrich was rejected. Yep. Why Vaughters is loved and, Tyler gets rejected, or whomever, right? So if we're just take Lance out of it for a moment, right? Because you're radioactive. What explains that difference between those other guys? Because Jan wasn't beating anybody up. Pantani wasn't screaming at anybody.
No, but these, they're and same in Spain with Jimenez, right? So you have a handful of examples here with characters who were had problems, so they could not handle, this is, and I've talked about this before, but nothing, looking at the whole situation, nothing infuriates me more than that, right? It has more to do with society and the press and just and the organizers and the politicians in the sport, how they will embrace, Jan Ulrich is not welcome at the start of the tour. Meanwhile, Eric Zabel's up there shaking hands with the guy in the yellow shirt. It's like, wait a minute, like this is fucking stupid. I don't understand.
Do you have any idea why that hypocrisy exists?
Only then, the ones who rose the highest. Pantani was the biggest athlete in Italy at the time. No, soccer, whatever sport, F1. No, Pantani was the biggest athlete in Italy. Jan was the biggest athlete in Germany. I was the biggest athlete here, and on and on. And so, maybe it has to do with those heights, and the only place you can end up is the complete opposite, like just at the bottom of the pool. But it doesn't. I don't think it excuses it. That just and we're talking about we're not talking about me again,
Yeah.
but with these stories, I mean, Pantani dead, Jimenez dead, Vandenbroek dead, Belgium, Gaumont dead in France. I mean, all guys that were at the top of the game, and they just couldn't handle just with their own demons. They couldn't handle that fall from grace, so they turned to other things. But nobody reached out, in many ways, the press just sort of chased that story. I mean, look at Vandenbroek. I mean, Frank Vandenbroek was arguably one of the most talented of all time. He was the next Merckx. He was the next and the press just let it go and just hammered this guy. And he, died in a hotel room in Senegal. Pantani dies at a dirty hotel room in Milan. Fucking Jan almost dies. I mean, it's like,
When did you realize Jan was in trouble? I know it was. I remember you and I talking about this in the summer of 18.
Yep.
You sent me a picture, and I'll never forget it. I was like, that can't be Jan.
Well, Jan was always, Jan has always liked to have fun. I mean, we talked about
but this didn't look like having fun.
No. This is, but I guess, because the other interesting thing is one of Jan's closest lieutenants when we were competing head to head was Andreas Kloden.
Yes.
Who ended up being on Astana with us and Radio Shack. And so I ended up getting to know Kloden and really, really getting to love him. So I had heard that a lot of these guys, so Kloden, Zabel, Danilo Hondo, they had tried to reach out to him. And, and it was in the press. He got in a fight with his neighbor. Like, these are no secrets. Like, this shit was out there. And then, he turned everybody away. And not just turned them away, but just flat out erased them from his life because he didn't want to hear it. But he had two guys, Frank and Mike Baldinger, so they're German brothers from where he's from. They're normal guys. Like, they're not professional cyclists, they're not rich, they're not famous, they're just regular dudes. They're good dudes. And they contacted me and they said, he's told everybody else to just leave him alone. And then he's turned on. They said, you're our last call. And I didn't know these guys. And so that's when I made the trip to was it Switzerland or Germany, a place, and that was, it was a mess.
Yeah, what was that like to see him like that?
Unrecognizable. It was like an alien had entered his body. It was. I've seen some crazy shit. I have never seen anything like this. But Jan, guy's 2 years sober. He's got his kids back in his life. He's on the bike. It's fucking love that guy.
It is amazing to me how our society, I can't understand it, why we sometimes lift people up and then find such joy in watching them crash.
Right. Yeah. We're not going to figure that out, And I don't spend any time. I mean, I get very frustrated and straight up mad when I see, the differences between Ulrich and Zabel and Pantani and Basso and on and on and on. But, and guys that were just not equipped to handle that downfall. That was the one thing I said to myself. I said, just whatever you do, just do not. I mean, you can go have fun and do some crazies, but don't you ever lose contact with your health, your wellness, your fitness, your family. Like, don't ever lose sight of that.
Did you go through a period in 2013 where you were pretty reclusive? And so this is meaning right after kind of the whole confession. Because you didn't, I'm trying to think, like, when did you start your podcast? In 16, 17?
I'd have to go back and look. It's been...
like, there was a period of time when you were really off the radar.
Well, yeah. I mean, no choice. Radar didn't pick you up either. I mean, there was nothing to do.
What was it like when you walked into a restaurant? Did people, you've told one story a number of times about, you walking across the street and a bunch of people in a bar.
But that was once.
What was the normal reaction like?
Perfectly fine.
Indifference?
Yeah, I mean, people are, and again, it goes to this comment thing. Like I just think about, that's why I don't read comments, because I walk through my day. I see guys on the golf course. I see people on bike rides. I see people in restaurants. I see, I go to meetings. Like it's that is not an accurate snapshot of what my life is like at all.
Even in 13. So, because remember, the other thing that was going on at that point in time is the foundation is crumbling.
Right.
And you're getting kicked out.
Yep.
And, you've told me before that hurt as much as anything else.
Yeah. I mean, it was surreal and just sad.
And what did the people at the foundation tell you unofficially? Not the board, but the people who worked there, the people who were doing the actual heavy lifting.
Well, I mean, now those folks I have a ton of regret about, because they were doing the Lord's work and they were not privy.
They weren't decision makers here.
Yeah, but and they believed the dream. They believed the story. And so that's, and as a byproduct of that, they in many ways felt complicit in the scheme. And so for that, that's tough for me to hear and I'll spend the rest of my days trying to make that okay for them. At the top, and I wasn't part of these discussions, so I don't know what the boardroom discussions were like or which consultants were hired, or I don't know how it all went down, but and I just knew it was the wrong thing. I knew it. I knew that timeout, yes, space, but some agreement here that we will both reemerge. That was the right thing to do. I mean, and I don't need somebody to sit here and say, well, you're right. But if I look at where Livestrong has ultimately ended up, and I look at, you brought up a podcast. I mean, if I look at my audience now, well, they're very different.
Yeah.
And one of them is not doing very well, and the other one's is back, so to speak.
What interaction do you have these days with the cancer community?
Very little. Just one-on-one. Just with, and by the way, that's fine. Like I don't need to be asked to speak at a gala or get some award or all the stuff I did in the past. If somebody's got a friend that's just been diagnosed and, hey, Lance, can you reach out to him? 100%. Let's go right now. And that's enough for me.
I don't know if you've been asked this question before. I'm sure you have. And so I apologize in advance. But when the story's done, what do you think your legacy is going to be?
Well, you don't. There's, well, yeah, that's harder to. What do I think it will be, or what do I want it to be? Because you don't get to write your own tombstone.
No. What do you think it's going to be?
Too early to say. Too early. I mean, if I know what it would have said in January of 2013.
Yeah.
But I don't like to brag about myself, but I got to say I'm really fucking proud.
What are you most proud of?
Well, I'm proud of the fact that I didn't quit.
Which time? Because you had a number of times to quit.
Well, just through the whole thing, that I was able to keep it together, and without really any support. And thank God we live in 2021, 20 whatever, where people can reinvent yourself on your own. You don't need network television. You don't need the New York Times. You don't need any of that. Like what we're doing right here, right now, you did this on your own. You bought the cameras, you got the mics, you're asking the questions, you're the smart guy. All the millions of people are listening. You did that on your own. You couldn't have done that 10 years ago, 20 years ago. right? So I've chosen to go that path, and I'm proud of that, honestly. So who knows what to your original question? Like I'm 50 years old. I think I'll live another 40 or 50 years. So there's a lot left to be told.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the amazing part here, right?
Yeah, and I don't need any more puff pieces in my life. Like, you know, I'm really beholden to a few things. One, my family. So that's the first checkpoint, and that's amazing, right? And then I really feel beholden and loyal to the audience of our podcast. And then as a byproduct of the success of the podcast, the fund, right? So the LP base, the people that have entrusted me, right? The guy that the whole world thought could never be trusted again, have trusted me with their hard-earned money. I'm beholden to them. And so those are all, and that's all I care about, right? So that's, and you know, but I don't need to be on the cover of Forbes because you know, it's just, I'm totally cool to keep that private. But look, I mean, at the end of the day, it is going to contain a lot of the rear view mirror. That's just the way, but I'm okay with that. That's the way society is. That's the way legacies are. Mine especially, it will mostly be that.
If you could go back in time to 15-year-old Lance.
Oh God.
You've got a week with him.
Yeah.
What kind of lessons would you try to impart on him?
You know, that's because 15 was an interesting age. So there would have been a lot. I mean, that was a very
You're good enough that you know. I picked 15
15
because
was when
you're a pro triathlete.
Well, I was a pro athlete, and it was when my mom kicked out Terry Armstrong.
Okay, so I didn't know that was 15.
Yeah, that was 15. So that was a point in time where it was her and I against the world. Like, fuck everybody else. We're gonna get these people. Like, he's gone. We're together. Like, let's go. And so that was a very important.
So the chip on your shoulder, which I'm guessing exists subconsciously, now became pretty conscious.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that chip on your shoulder did a lot of good for you and obviously a lot of bad for you.
Yeah.
So do you think that, again, in this thought experiment, right, if you had a week to coach that kid, could you have figured out a way to extract the value from that complex and soften some of the damage that it was going to ultimately cause you via the damage it would cause to others?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really, nobody, I mean, 15-year-olds don't realize that, but the amount of trauma that I had already had in my life, which, you know, just got actually worse and worse and worse. I mean, cancer was hugely traumatic, and then the fall was traumatic. Like, there's a lot to unpack there. And so, and then, you know, never meeting your father and having somebody around, it was just, and never having that figure in your life, and the figure that was there was wildly defective. You know, it would have been in and around that, you know, whether that was through even therapy at the time. Then, you know, I mean, if I was, by the way, if somebody would have come up to me when I was 15 and said, you know, I feel like you've had some crazy shit in your 15 years, you should just do a little bit, once a month, I would have said, you know what, why don't you go fuck yourself? I ain't doing therapy for nothing. Like, I embrace that stuff now, but there would have been a lot of work to do even then.
What could you have told him, though? Like, again, if he's not willing to go to therapy, which I can understand, that's a pretty hard sell to a really, really cocky 15-year-old.
Right.
You know, what else can you tell him? I'm just, or was he too far gone at that point? Like, you know, it's one of the things I've learned about myself over time is that so many of the character traits that were both positive and negative, and they tend to cluster like right on top of each other, right? It's like two genes that sit right next to each other in the chromosome, one good, one bad. A lot of those traits come about long before we're consciously aware of what led to them.
Yeah.
And I think your case is really obvious sometimes. Like some of those traumas are so obvious, right? Like the dad, the stepdad, the growing up without this, the growing up in a place, and then of course that says nothing about cancer, which I don't know. Like, do you feel you've gone back and unpacked that PTSD through all of those layers now as an adult?
Well, I don't know that any of us can ever unpack it all, but in the last, year, I've certainly done more unpacking than in the previous 49. Yeah. Yeah. Like way more, and that's, but, and I should have started that process a lot earlier. But, I guess going back to the question though, on the, I was just, even then at 15, everything was, I drove a fast car, and every green light was a competition, and everything was like, slow down, kid. Like it was just, everything was a fight, not even a competition. It was a fight, right? And but you said it. I mean, it would have been impossible to get through. Just like that 15-year-old, the 25-year-old, the 35-year-old, even the 45-year-old, you would not have gotten through.
I think that's something that very few people can understand. I can relate to it, Lance, because I've had my own total destruction, and I've played the game in my head 100 times. God, I just wish I could take that all back. I wish I could undo all of that stuff. But I realize if I were to undo all of that stuff, I wouldn't have fallen down. Right. And if I didn't fall down and lose it all.
Right. But this is when you say, well, I wouldn't change a thing, because these series of events happened and boom, it caused, whether it's deep work or introspection or realignment, whatever you want to call it, then that wouldn't have happened. Like that's just that's a hard answer. I mean, that answer's never worked for me, but because, people, but they analyze so much of the stuff, but I mean, in many ways it's true.
Yeah. So how do you keep fit these days? I mean, you talked about swimming. Is that the mainstay of your training?
No, now we're in the summer. So now Aspen is completely thawed out. The mountain bike trails are open.
What's your fastest time up Mount Evans?
I've only done Mount Evans once. Like in 90. I did it in 1990.
That's at your doorstep.
No, that's not that close.
It's close to Aspen, isn't it? It's like a couple hours away.
Well, that's not close. I don't get in a car to ride my bike. That's kind of a rule.
All right, what was your fastest time up Palomar?
Don't know. That was a long time ago.
Do you care anymore? Do you still care how fast you can ride up the mountain?
No, I find myself being happier and happier just riding.
Do you use a power meter still?
Nope. No heart rate, no power meter, none of that bullshit.
Do you have any idea what you would ride up Madone in today? How many watts you could average if we stuck a power meter on you?
I have no idea.
Like 350?
No, I doubt I could do that.
I bet you could.
You give me a week or two to train, I could. I don't know, but I find myself just when I'm out, it's like I ride easier as opposed to harder. I mean,
do you enjoy a group ride, or do you still enjoy just kind of going out on your own doing a 4-hour ride?
I like it. I like being all alone.
How much on the mountain bike versus road bike?
Mostly mountain bike.
Just because of the risk of cars?
I like staying away. And it's where we live. You get out in the mountains on a mountain bike all by yourself. Come on.
You running much?
I haven't run. I keep getting hurt running. I think I'm too old to run. I don't do at this age, if I did yoga 3 days a week or was serious about stretching and pliability and things that I should be thinking about at 50, I could run. But my dumb ass is just like, put the shoes on, don't stretch a bit, let's go. Like that doesn't work when you're 50.
And I mean, if I were to give you, what's the tightest interval you'd swim 10 100s on? What would be your touch and go interval for 10 100s?
With sea level. So here in Austin, level. Like if I went right now.
Yeah. Would you be 105 touch and go?
No, I couldn't do that right now. I could do
110
to 110. I'd be really touching and going at the end, but
so 115 you could bring him in at 110.
No problem.
Yeah. So you're still a fit guy.
I'm fitter than most 50-year-olds.
What's your biggest what's the biggest liability to your fitness? What's your biggest vice? Food, alcohol? What gets in the way of? Because what do you weigh right now?
180.
Okay, so you're 15 pounds above your tour weight, which is actually not a lot given most retired cyclists. Yeah. So is that a struggle to maintain your weight?
No, I don't try. I mean, I seem to have a balance between consumption and whether you're consuming food or alcohol or whatever, that's consumption. And exercise. I have to exercise, not because I want to stay a certain weight or I want to look a certain.
You need it for your mental health.
It's my own sanity. Like it's the only reason.
That's interesting, by the way, isn't it? There are a lot of former pro athletes that I know who, once it's no longer their job, they just do not want to do it anymore.
I will ride for as long as this body will allow it to ride. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, man, it has been great sitting down.
Yeah. Been a long time coming.
I know. And I've got an amazing salmon and okra dish waiting for you.
Oh God, dude, you got to tell that story right quick. You can't tease them out with that. I'll tell the story. I'll tell the story. So people that like Anna, who cooks for me all the time, she knows that I don't like salmon. And like growing up, we would eat okra and I just don't like okra. So I come over, this has been
6-7 months ago.
And I walk in and I'm like, that smells like salmon. I'm like, hey, what's for dinner, Peter? He's like, oh, I got you grilling this amazing salmon. I was like, oh.
I was on the Traeger, my special marinade.
I was like, oh, okay. And then I was like, what are we having with it? And you're like, oh, I got some fresh okra. And I was like, this isn't happening. This is a fucking joke. Like I'm getting punked.
It's like Anna called me to tell me this before.
And I was like sitting there just like getting through the meal and we had a wonderful time. And then I don't know why but when I was stepping out, I was like, I have to be honest with you guys. Like there are two things in this world that I just really can't stand to eat: salmon and okra.
But you had a brave face, man. I wouldn't have known. You put it down. As far as salmon and okra go, I hope it was good salmon and good okra. So
we had the Japanese whiskey too.
That definitely lubricated it. All right, my friend.
Oh man,
you ready to go get your butt kicked
in the sim?
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't. You don't know that I'm going to get my butt kicked, so it's not fair for you to say that. But I'm ready to. I'm ready to go see what happens.
Okay, very well.
I can drive.
I'm sure you can, but I just think I'm excited to see this.
Okay, good. Let's do it.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of The Drive. If you're interested in diving deeper into any topics we discuss, we've created a membership program that allows us to bring you more in-depth, exclusive content without relying on paid ads. It's our goal to ensure members get back much more than the price of the subscription. Now, to that end, membership benefits include a bunch of things. 1, totally kick-ass comprehensive podcast show notes that detail every topic, paper, person, thing we discuss on each episode. The word on the street is nobody's show notes rival these. Monthly AMA episodes or Ask Me Anything episodes, hearing these episodes completely. Access to our private podcast feed that allows you to hear everything without having to listen to spiels like this. The Qualies, which are a super short podcast that we release every Tuesday through Friday, highlighting the best questions, topics, and tactics discussed on previous episodes of The Drive. This is a great way to catch up on previous episodes without having to go back and necessarily listen to everyone. Steep discounts on products that I believe in, but for which I'm not getting paid to endorse. And a whole bunch of other benefits that we continue to trickle in as time goes on. If you want to learn more and access these member-only benefits, you can head over to peterattiamd.com/subscribe. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, all with the ID Peter Attia MD. You can also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast player you listen on. This podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Finally, I take conflicts of interest very seriously. For all of my disclosures and the companies I invest in or advise, please visit peterattiamd.com/about, where I keep an up-to-date and active list of such companies.